Chapter 1955. The baby suddenly struggled and opened his mouth to cry. She touched his little butt and found that something was wrong. So she changed his diaper. She couldn't sleep until the middle of the night, when she finally fell asleep. The baby woke up a few times in the middle of the night. Shin Manting didn't sleep well. The next day, she was woken up by a noise. She got up and opened the door. Shin Luo, and had just woken up. Did you sleep well? Shin Luoan looked at her. It's time to eat. As Shin Luoan spoke, his gaze shifted to her bed. Shin Manting was a little wary. She blocked his view and nodded. I know. Shin Luo and looked at her deeply and said, I want to see the baby. He's still asleep. Don't disturb him, Shin Manting whispered as she blocked the door. Shin Luo and seemed a little unhappy, but he didn't say anything. He turned around and left. After a while, Shin Manting walked out in her cotton shoes. Shin Luo and looked up and was a little disappointed when he saw that she didn't come out with the baby. A middle-aged woman sitting next to her saw that Shin Manting was only wearing pajamas. She exclaimed, How can you wear so little? What if you catch a cold? No, go put on a coat. As she spoke, she pushed Shin Luoan and said, Hurry up and get your wife some clothes. Shin Manting became alert and said, No need. I'll get it myself. You're still in confinement. Don't walk around. Just sit here, the middle-aged woman said. Auntie rebuked. Men are meant to be ordered around. You've already done it, so why are you asking your man to do it? Shin Manting gritted her teeth and said, But he's not. Sit down. Shin Luoan glanced at her. I'll get it. As he spoke, he stood up and walked toward the room. He opened the door and took out a down jacket from yesterday. He couldn't help but stop in front of the bed. He squatted down and looked at the well-behaved and delicate baby. At first glance, the baby's features were so similar to his. Unconsciously, a sense of satisfaction arose in his heart. Shin Luo and gently reached out his finger and touched the baby's little face. The baby was still sleeping and didn't feel anything. Shin Luo and felt that his whole life was complete. He couldn't help but grin. Shin Manting waited outside for a long time. She had a bad feeling about this. Just as he was about to stand up, he heard footsteps coming from inside. Shin Luoan came over with a down jacket and said, Put this on. Then she looked at the auntie and said, Auntie Lin, it's time to eat. Hey, you're here. Auntie Lin brought out the freshly cooked porridge and said, A woman's vitality will be greatly damaged after giving birth. You must nourish yourself. Shin Manting couldn't help but poke her head out to take a look. At a glance, she saw an unknown piece of meat floating inside. Along with a few pieces of vegetables, the appearance was really a little embarrassing. However, it smelled pretty good. Aunt Lin served Shin Manting a bowl and said, Here, try it. What is this? Shin Manting took a sniff but couldn't tell what it was. Auntie Lin did not say anything and said, Try it first. Shin Manting took a sip and said, It's sweet and fresh. Does it taste good? Not bad. Aunt Lin smiled and said, Eat more if you like it. Come, there's more in the pot. Shin Manting had a good appetite. She drank 2 bowls at once and said, It's delicious. What meat is this? It's quite smooth. Is it frog meat? Chapter 1956. Snake meat? When Shin Manting heard this word, she suddenly felt her stomach churn. She felt nauseous. She stood up and covered her mouth, wanting to leave. Aunt Lin immediately held her down and said, Don't vomit. Snake meat is very nutritious. Come and drink some water. But Shin Manting couldn't control herself. Aunt Lin directly pressed her down and said, You also think it's delicious. It's good for your health and milk. No matter what, you have to swallow it. Shin Manting looked at her uncomfortably, but when she heard Aunt Lin's words, she still forced herself to swallow it. Shin Manting took a sip of the water that was handed to her. After a while she felt much better. But when she saw the porridge in the pot in front of her, she felt uncomfortable. The baby was crying inside. Shin Manting immediately got up and walked inside. When feeding, Shin Manting didn't know if it was an illusion, but she felt that the baby was eating better today. Did the 2 bowls of snake meat really work? She thought to herself, but she still felt very uncomfortable. No matter what, if she was asked to eat the snake meat again, she would definitely not eat it again. After the baby finished feeding, Shin Manting changed his diaper, and the baby fell asleep again. Shin Manting felt helpless and amused at the same time. She whispered, "Just like a little pig." Suddenly, she heard footsteps, followed by a knock on the door. There was no doubt that it was Shen Luoan. "Can I come in?" "No." Shin Manting thought. "I want to see the baby." Hearing this, Shin Manting subconsciously looked at the little baby in her arms. This face was very similar to his. If Shin Luoan saw it, would he be more determined to keep the baby? Shin Manting was hesitating, but she heard the sound of the door being opened. Shin Luoan was wearing casual home clothes, and his angular temperament seemed to have softened a lot. He looked down at Shin Manting and said, "Are you asleep again?" She didn't know if it was an illusion, but she knew he was asking about the baby. But a pair of eyes were looking at her. Inexplicably, she suddenly felt her heart suddenly jump. The turbulent feeling came suddenly, and Shin Manting immediately lowered her head. She glanced at the sleeping baby and replied, "He's asleep." Shin Luoan walked forward and looked at the swaddle. "Can I hold him?" Shin Manting looked up and saw the desire and inquiry in his eyes. Shin Manting's heart fluttered, and she found it impossible to refuse. Shin Luoan? He seemed to have changed. She hesitated for a moment before pushing the child forward and saying, "Be careful. Don't hurt the baby." When Shin Luoan saw that she had agreed, he was overjoyed, and a sincere smile appeared on his face. She reached out with both hands and gently picked up the child. The fragrant smell of milk and the soft, warm swaddling clothes were in his arms. Shin Luoan felt his heartbeat quicken. It was very clear. His gaze swept across the child in his arms. Those eyebrows and those eyes were so similar to his own. Shin Luoan felt a sense of satisfaction that he hadn't felt for a long time. He asked, "Have you thought of a name for the baby?" Shin Manting wasn't in the mood to name the baby. She suddenly remembered when Shin Luoan mentioned it. She looked at the baby's pink and tender cheeks and shook her head gently. "Well, let me think." Chapter 1957. He's going to name the baby? Shin Manting was shocked. She suddenly felt annoyed that someone was coveting her things. She frowned and reached out her hand, saying, "Give me the baby." As she spoke, she took the baby in her arms. Shin Manting's voice was a little heavy. No matter how stupid Shin Luoan was, he could see that this woman was angry. Shin Luoan pursed his lips and frowned. Seeing Shin Manting's vigilant look, his good mood suddenly sank to the bottom. His gentle eyes became colder. "Shin Manting, what do you mean?" Shin Luoan's voice was not loud, but the anger hidden in it was obvious. Shin Manting heard this and shrank back. She looked up and saw Shin Luoan's angry face. She lowered her head and said coldly, "The baby is afraid of strangers. He will cry later." "Afraid of strangers?" Shin Luoan suddenly laughed. "You can make up a better excuse if you want to brush me off. Afraid of strangers? He's only been born for a few days, and you're telling me he's afraid of strangers?" Shin Manting did not speak, but hugged the baby tighter in her arms. The baby was hers. The baby was hers. Even if he was the baby's biological father, she would not allow him to take him away. Shin Manting did not say these words out loud. She held the baby in her arms, but her heart was not at all confident. Shin Luoan's tone was not light, but Shin Manting's silence made him feel that it was meaningless. She gritted her teeth, stood up, and turned to leave. She closed the door, making a sound that was neither light nor heavy. The baby seemed to feel something, but it seemed that he did not notice anything. He pursed his lips, and then his breathing returned to normal. Looking at the closed door, Shin Manting's eyes were sore, and her breathing stagnated. Her heart seemed to be hit hard by something. She looked up at the ceiling above her head. The room was quiet. February 1st, cloudy. "I don't know where Shin Luoan went, but Aunt Lin is still here to take care of me and the baby. I know that I must have angered him yesterday, and he did not come back last night. Thank God, I can finally take care of the baby and have a good night's sleep. I hope he forgets me and doesn't come again." February 8th, sunny. Shin Luoan left for a week and never came back. "Thanks to Aunt Lin's care, I could feel my body getting better and better. The baby was awake more and more. Sometimes he could open his eyes and look at me. He was very satisfied. Baby mommy loves you. February 13th rain. The baby was half a month old. Shen Luoan was back. He looked much thinner than before. He had dinner at home, but he didn't say a word to me. He just came to see the baby. She didn't offer to hug me, which made me feel strange. He went out again, and I had a feeling he was going to do something that would make me very uncomfortable. Hopefully, I'm just overthinking things. He finally thought of a name for the baby, Xinyue. Yu as in surpassing, Xiao as in ambitious and ruthless, surpassing ambitious and ruthless. Shen Manting closed her diary. Little Moon, who was sitting next to her, was staring at her with his beautiful dark eyes. Suddenly, he opened his mouth and yawned. Her face was flushed, and she clenched her fists as she looked at Shen Manting's innocent and ignorant look. Shen Manting's lips curled into a smile. She picked up the infant and whispered, Xinyue, do you like this name? Chapter 1958. Shen Manting's body stiffened, and she turned her head to look. Shen Luoan was covered in dust. It was obvious that he had just come in. His eyes were a little red. He stood outside and looked in through the crack of the door. Shen Manting was shocked and reached out to close the door. However, Shen Luoan blocked the door and squeezed his way in. As soon as he came in, Shen Manting smelled the alcohol on him. After a sniff, Shen Manting was alarmed. She was shocked and shrank back with the child in her arms. She asked warily, "Did you drink?" Shen Luoan narrowed his eyes and looked a little lazy. His eyes were very red. He looked at her with a pair of indescribable eyes. Shen Manting became more and more uneasy. She stepped back and said, "Get out of the way. The baby is still here." When Shen Luoan heard this, he seemed to be a little sober and took a step back. He took off his coat and hung it up. Then he walked over slowly. Shen Manting was shocked and unconsciously shrank to the corner of the wall. "What are you afraid of?" Shen Luoan looked down at her with slightly red eyes. "I won't eat you." Shen Manting looked at him and frowned. "Which you? Which Xiao?" Shen Manting was stunned and couldn't react for a moment. "Didn't you name the baby?" Shen Manting was silent for a moment and answered, "Yes, you as in surpassing and Xiao as in ambitious." "Ambitious?" Shen Luoan suddenly laughed. Shen Manting was bewildered by his laughter. She had no idea what he was laughing at. "This word is too fierce. You'd better change it." "Fierce?" "Yes." Shen Luoan responded and moved his eyes to the child in Shen Manting's arms. "I asked Grandma to predict this child's fate." Hearing this, Shen Manting was shocked and then annoyed. "You're the one who has a bad life." Shen Luoan glanced at her face and said in a low voice, "I don't believe it either, but Grandma said that his health may not be very good. If he follows you, he is very likely to die." "You're talking nonsense." Shen Manting was angry. "Don't try to lie to me. Even if you want this child, you have to make up a better reason." Shen Luoan's face darkened, and he said, "If I wanted you to hand the child over to me, I would snatch him away directly. You wouldn't be able to do anything about it." Shen Manting's voice trailed off, and she gritted her teeth in silence. "Look at you now. You don't have money or power. The only thing you have is your face. Now that you've ruined it like this, what do you have to fight me with?" Shen Luoan looked at her and said with contempt, "Look in the mirror. You don't even have the capital to sell yourself now." Shen Luoan's words were too straightforward. His words stabbed straight into Shen Manting's heart, and her face instantly turned pale. "What, you can't accept it?" Shen Luoan looked at her and smiled sarcastically. "I'm telling you the truth. Don't think too highly of yourself. If I didn't really want to take you back, do you really think I'd want to waste my time with you?" That was right. Shen Manting knew this better than anyone else. Shen Luoan was telling the truth. However, his tone was like he was humiliating a beggar who had nothing. Shen Manting gritted her teeth and sneered. "So, you can't help it now, and you're angry out of shame?" The smile on Shen Luoan's face darkened. He gritted his teeth and sneered. "You? Uh-huh." Shen Manting sneered, but she didn't say anything. Chapter 1959. Shin Manting. The words were squeezed out from the gaps between his teeth. Shin Luo's eyes were bloodshot as he glared at her. She felt a chill run down her spine. However, after staring at him for a long time, he finally sneered. Shin Luo was even more furious, and his grip on her hand tightened. Shin Manting closed her eyes and hugged the baby tighter. Seeing her like this, Shin Luo suppressed his anger and flung his hand away in exasperation. I'm going to take a shower. I dare you to lock the door. With that, he kicked the door open and walked out. There were no lights on outside, so it was pitch black. Shin Manting immediately stood up, closed the door and locked it. Shin Manting turned off the lights and lay on the bed with the child in her arms. Shin Luo, who was outside, heard the commotion inside. The anger in his heart somehow dissipated. He stared at the darkness around him and took a deep breath. It seemed like a sigh, but it wasn't. Childish. Shin Luo took a shower and took out the keys from the drawer. He opened the door and walked in. Shin Manting was breastfeeding the baby, and the lights were off in the room. Shin Manting was startled when she heard the door open. She looked up and saw that Shin Luo had already turned on the lights. When he saw Shin Manting looking as if she had seen a ghost, he sneered and threw the key onto the bedside table. He took off his shoes, lifted the blanket, and was about to lie down. Shin Manting was even more shocked. She bounced up and roared. What do you want to do? Let's sleep. Shin Luo was not ashamed at all. He glanced outside and said, It's cold outside. It's warmer inside. Shin Manting sucked on the baby's breasts, revealing his fair belly. Shin Luo glanced at it and felt his body heat up. Feeling a little thirsty, he turned his head away and said, If you're done, then go to sleep. I won't do anything to you. As he spoke, he had already laid down. Shin Manting tilted her body slightly and felt her hair stand on end. She looked at him and said, Then you sleep here. I'll sleep somewhere else. His tone was filled with lingering fear, and his voice was trembling with unwillingness. Shin Luo's face darkened. He got out of bed and locked the door. Sleep here. Shin Manting felt as if her heart was being pierced, and she felt extremely uncomfortable. She gritted her teeth and looked at him. Then she glanced at the infant. After standing there for a while, he felt a chill. The first month was definitely not a warm day. When the child was full of milk, Shin Manting couldn't take it anymore. It was very cold. Give it to me. Shin Luo reached out and glanced at Little Moon. She glanced at him, then sat down on the edge of the bed with the child in her arms. Shin Luo didn't care. He reached out and took the baby in his arms. Shin Manting was shocked. Just as she was about to speak, she caught a glimpse of Shin Luo's inexplicably happy face. For some strange reason, he loosened his grip and the baby was carried away. Little Moon had been born for more than half a month. This was the second time Shin Luo had a child in his arms. Compared to the last time, the little doll was obviously heavier. Although the increase was not significant, Shin Luo could clearly sense the changes. Shin Luo's eyes crinkled, and his heart melted. He whispered, Daddy's little darling. Shin Manting's heart fluttered, and it felt as if it had suddenly been squeezed. Shin Luo's face was gentle, and he looked very much like an elegant gentleman. Chapter 1960. However, only his family knew what he really looked like. No, perhaps, only Shin Manting knew the true face of this man. Shin Luo looked very gentle as he held the baby. He looked different from when he was facing her. He was playing with the baby, but the baby didn't respond at all. However, Shin Luo didn't seem to feel bored at all. Instead, he looked very happy. Say something else. Shin Luo suddenly said. Shin Manting was stunned and looked at him. What? Shin Yue Xiao. Xiao as in brave and good at fighting. Shin Luo held the baby in his arms and the smile on his face gradually disappeared. He looked at Shin Manting and said, Xiao as in ambitious and fierce. His tone sounded like he was asking for Shin Manting's opinion, but it didn't seem like it. For a moment, Shin Manting suddenly couldn't understand this man's attitude. Facing his gaze, Shin Manting had an indescribable feeling. She slightly avoided his gaze and then responded. Okay. Shen Luo'an's expression softened and he said, "Go to sleep. It's getting late." He carefully placed the baby in the middle of the bed. The bed was very big. It was 2 meters long and was enough for 2 people to lie down. Shen Luo'an fell asleep. She didn't know whether he did it intentionally or not, but his whole body shrank to the corner. Not to mention the distance between Shen Manting and the baby, there was still some distance between him and Shen Manting. Shen Manting's heart, which had been silent for a long time, suddenly jumped. Looking at him, Shen Luo'an had already closed his eyes. Is he afraid of scaring me? After a long time, she got up and turned off the light. She lifted the quilt, lay down, and closed her eyes. However, the sleepiness just now seemed to be an illusion. Shen Manting couldn't fall asleep no matter how hard she tried. Her mind was full of Shen Luo'an. He was clearly sleeping beside her, but he kept messing around in her mind. Shen Manting didn't know how long she kept her eyes open, but she felt sleepy again. However, the baby next to her suddenly moved, and then there was a small cry. Shen Manting reached out and gently patted the baby. She softly coaxed, "Little Moon, be good. Don't cry." The baby really quieted down. Shen Manting yawned and closed her eyes. After sleeping for a few minutes, the baby woke up again. The moment she opened her mouth, she began to cry. Her small hands and feet flailed about restlessly. Shen Manting swept him over and tested his diaper. When she didn't find anything strange, she lifted his shirt and started breastfeeding him. Shen Manting kept her eyes closed throughout the entire process. Habitual and numb. However, he didn't seem to be impatient at all. Shen Luo'an witnessed everything in the dark. He looked at her with a burning gaze. Shen Manting didn't notice anything. After feeding him milk, Shen Manting put down her clothes and soon fell into a deep sleep. Shen Luo'an closed his eyes again, but he didn't sleep for long before the baby woke up again. It wasn't easy to raise a child. Shen Luo'an finally experienced it. The baby woke up 5 or 6 times in one night. Every time Shen Manting woke up, she would either feed him or change his diaper. Every time he switched on the lights, his eyes would be blinded. Shen Manting felt an indescribable joy in her heart when she saw it. She unconsciously slowed down the process of changing the baby's diaper. Chapter 1961. Needless to say, Shen Manting slept even less than him. But his biological clock forced him to wake up at this time. Shen Luo'an couldn't fall asleep no matter how hard he tried. It was 6:30 in the morning. Shen Manting was still asleep. Shen Luo'an yawned, got up quietly, and went to the bathroom. He looked in the mirror and saw 2 dark circles under his eyes. What a mess! But he was so happy. He stared at the mirror for a long time and suddenly laughed. Are you crazy, Shen Luo'an? He reached out and tapped the mirror, then washed up. Shen Manting slept until 9 o'clock. She reached out and touched the front, but it was empty. He opened his eyes abruptly and saw that the seat beside him had long since been empty. He quickly got up and ran outside barefoot. She saw the man sitting on the sofa. Shen Luo'an was holding a diaper in his hand, and he didn't know what to do. The baby was placed next to him. His little butt was bare, and there was a thick cotton pad under him. Shen Manting's heart, which had been clenched tightly, suddenly relaxed. She quickly walked up and looked at Shen Luo'an saying, "The baby will catch a cold like this. But he's pooped. I have to change it." Shen Luo'an frowned and handed the diaper to Shen Manting. Shen Manting saw it and took it. Shen Luo'an unconsciously moved away, and Shen Manting took his place. She looked at the baby and found that his little butt was clean. Shen Manting had an ominous premonition in her heart and asked, "What did you use to clean his wound?" "Wipe." Shen Luo'an's face lit up with realization. "So that's what you usually do? What else?" Shen Manting was even more shocked. "Don't tell me you washed him directly in the water?" Shen Luo'an heard this and suddenly felt a little guilty, but he didn't say anything. Shen Manting was annoyed and hit him with the clean diaper. "What if he catches a cold? Go away." She looked angry, then turned around and quickly put the diaper on the baby. Shen Manting's action was so rough that Shen Luo'an couldn't react for a moment. In the blink of an eye, Shen Manting was busy. This feeling was a little strange. Shen Luo'an actually thinks it's not bad? He looked at Shin Manting, who hadn't even washed up yet. His face was pale, and he looked extremely slovenly. In all fairness, this Shin Manting was uglier than any other state he had seen before. Inexplicably, Shin Luoan was in a good mood. Shin Manting quickly wrapped the baby up. Then she quickly picked him up and said, "Don't bathe the baby in the future. It'll be troublesome if he catches a cold." Shin Luoan didn't reply. He looked at the baby in his arms. Shin Manting also realized that she might have been a little too fierce and said uncomfortably, "I'll go wash my face first. Why isn't Aunt Lin here?" "I told her to rest today." Shin Luoan stood up. "What do you want to eat?" "I'll go buy it." Shin Manting asked, "Is the food outside edible?" Chapter 1962. Shin Manting glanced at it and saw that it was a can of tonic. It belonged to the category of health supplements. The words on it were very conspicuous. Postpartum supplement. In other words, it was specially bought for her. Shin Luoan handed it to her. He looked at her slightly absent-minded face and felt a sense of satisfaction in his heart. He turned around and said, "Wait for me to come back." After leaving these words, Shin Luoan opened the door and walked out. Shin Manting looked at his back and suddenly realized what was going on. She seemed to be more and more relaxed around him. February 14th, sunny. Shin Luoan seems to be different. He seems to be sincere to the child. But what should I do? The days passed peacefully, and Shin Manting slowly got used to Shin Luoan's existence. Shin Luoan seemed to be really different from before. At the very least, he didn't do anything out of line every single day he was here. It was another morning. When Shin Manting opened her eyes, she saw a large sleeping face. Shin Luoan gently placed his hand on her body and circled it around her and the baby. The baby's position was perfectly empty in the middle, and the baby was well protected. But even so, it still gave her a fright. Shin Manting subconsciously shrank back a little. This shrinkage not only woke Shin Luoan up, but also startled the baby. The baby moved a little, then opened his mouth and cried. Shin Manting quickly patted him, and after a while, the baby became quiet again. But when she looked up, she saw a pair of deep and hazy eyes. Shin Manting subconsciously held her breath and looked at him. "Morning," Shin Luoan said, then stretched and said, "It seems that Aunt Lin is here. I'll go and see." Shin Luoan never procrastinated when he got up. Shin Manting looked at the other half of the bed in front of her, slightly absent-minded. His mind buzzed, and many questions popped up one after another. Why did he sleep with me in his arms? More importantly, she didn't feel it at all. The ominous feeling in her heart grew stronger, and Shin Manting was a little annoyed. Shin Luoan invaded her world day by day, and she had slowly become used to him. However, it was impossible for Shin Luoan to have the patience to play house with her and play the role of the husband of this nameless family of three. His target was definitely the baby. Once she let her guard down, he could snatch the child away, right? The more he thought about it, the more terrifying it was. Shin Manting broke out in a cold sweat because of her own thoughts. This situation was too terrifying. However, he had to be on guard. Shin Luoan could really do such a thing. Shin Manting also got up to wash up, but she looked a little absent-minded. When he came out, the baby had already been carried out. Shin Luoan sat on the sofa and fed the baby. The baby held the bottle with both hands and sucked contentedly. The feeling in Shin Manting's heart suddenly became stronger. She looked at them, walked over and said, "Let me do it." However, Shin Luoan was unwilling to do so. He said, "There's no need for that. Go and have breakfast first. I'll take your turn later." He had a silly smile on his face. Shin Manting hesitated for a moment, but didn't say anything. She turned around to eat breakfast. Suddenly, Shin Luoan, who was sitting on the sofa, laughed and said, "Look, our son is smiling at me." Chapter 1963. He didn't notice that Shin Manting's body stiffened slightly when he said "our son." Shin Luoan walked over with the baby in his arms and crouched down. But soon there was a look of regret on his face and he said, "He's not smiling anymore." Aunt Lin heard this and was amused. She rebuked, How can such a small baby know how to smile? He'll smile with you when he grows up. Shin Manting glanced at him and her body tensed up. The strange feeling in her heart magnified and got out of hand. But Shin Luoan didn't notice it. He held the baby with a look of regret on his face. He seemed to notice that Shin Manting was looking at him, and he looked up at her. Shin Manting looked at him and quickly looked away. She said, "Do you want to eat? You eat first. I'll hold the baby." Shin Luoan sat down next to her with the baby in his arms and said, "Have you noticed that the baby has become more and more good-looking recently? Look at his face. It's much rounder." Aunt Lin looked a little proud and said, "Of course. Mom has good food and drinks, and the baby has enough nutrition. Of course he's become good-looking." Shin Luoan grinned and said, "That's true. I'll give you a bonus later." The smile on Aunt Lin's face blossomed as she said, "Thank you, sir." Everything seemed to be harmonious. Shin Manting's heart, which she had finally calmed down in the morning, suddenly began to waver again. February 28th, sunny. Her confinement was finally over. She couldn't wait to take a shower, wash her hair, and change into new clothes. She felt that she finally looked like a human. Ha ha ha. I'm going to take a walk on the street. I'm going to take little Moon out to bask in the sun. The outside world, here I come. Shin Luo, and specially bought a small cart, but Shin Manting didn't feel comfortable leaving the baby alone in the cart. So the cart was fortunately left unused. It was the first time Shin Manting took the baby out, so she didn't dare to go far. The sun was not small outside, but because it was early spring, it wasn't so hot. The baby opened his eyes and habitually frowned under the sun. He frowned slightly and thought of Shin Luoan's unhappy look. Shin Manting held the little guy in her arms and smiled. Shin Luoan reached out a hand to cover the baby's face and said, "Don't get sunburned." "I'm covering you," Shin Manting said with a smile as she arched her body slightly to shield the infant from the sun. "Little Moon's skin is tender. It'll be terrible if he gets sunburned." Shin Manting glared at him angrily and said, "The sun is so strong. Who will die from the heat? Why don't you use an umbrella?" "Wait for me. I'll go buy an umbrella," Shin Luoan said before disappearing. Soon he came back with an umbrella in his hand. It was still spring, and the weather had been a little humid recently. The sunlight in Jiangnan was not that strong. However, Shin Luoan's concern for the baby left her speechless. Under the curious gazes of the passers-by, he finally walked a full circle. Shin Manting was in a much better mood. For the past month, he had been cooped up in a small room all day. He was bored to death. But because the infant couldn't be left outside for too long, Shin Manting still carried him home. Aunt Lin had already prepared lunch. When she saw them return, she said, "You're back. You can eat now." Chapter 1964. The baby was very obedient. Shin Manting washed her hands, scooped some rice, and sat down. Shin Luoan did the same. He quickly sat down beside her. Delicious dishes were placed in front of them. The two of them sat next to each other, but Shin Manting did not move away. Even Shin Manting didn't realize that she had become more and more tolerant of Shin Luo, and over the past month. Shin Luoan glanced at her and smiled. "That, sir." Aunt Lin wiped her hands with her apron. There was already a thin layer of sweat on her face. When he spoke, Shin Manting and Shin Luoan looked at him. Aunt Lin looked a little apologetic and said, "You see, Manting is out of confinement now. I promised to take care of her until then. I won't be coming tomorrow." Shin Manting was shocked and asked, "Why are you in such a hurry?" "Yes." Aunt Lin looked apologetic. "My daughter is about to give birth. She has been nagging me for the past few days." Shin Luoan frowned. Shin Manting also felt that it was a little sudden. Aunt Lin's cooking was good, and she was kind. Most importantly, she was attentive. For the past month, she had been teaching him. His mother was supposed to do all the postpartum chores, but Aunt Lin did it all. There was no doubt that Shin Manting was reluctant to tell them that she was leaving. Seeing their reaction, Auntie Lin said, "I agreed to work for a month, not only because Sir offered a high salary, but also because it's a suitable time for my daughter. Aren't you going back to the capital? Why don't I help you go back to the capital? Just in a few days. What do you think?" Back to the imperial capital? Shen Manting's heart skipped a beat, and she subconsciously glanced at Shen Luoan. Shen Luo, and didn't seem surprised at all. He nodded and said, "All right. Thank you for all this time, Aunt Lin." Aunt Lin finally heaved a sigh of relief and said, Of course, of course." Soon Aunt Lin left. After he left, no matter how delicious the food was, Shen Manting felt that it was tasteless. Back to the imperial capital? She was not going back. However, Shen Luoan was from the capital. Over the past month, other than going back a few times, he spent most of his time here. He couldn't stay in Jiangnan for the rest of his life, right? Shen Manting felt vexed. It was supposed to be a happy day, but why couldn't he be happy? "If you don't want to go back, you can wait," Shen Luoan said. "The baby is a month old. I've already told my parents about the registration." "Register me in your household register?" Shen Manting looked at him with a reluctant expression on her face. Shen Luo and put down his chopsticks and said, "My parents and grandma are looking forward to seeing little Moon. Ever since the baby was born, they've said more than once that they wanted to visit you and their grandson." Shen Manting's expression darkened. "But I was afraid that you wouldn't agree, and I didn't want to scare you, so I didn't let them come." Shen Luoan looked at her. "They're old. This is their first grandchild." "I'm not young either," Shen Manting said in a low voice. "This is my first child." "You're also my first." Shen Luoan's gaze softened. "Manting, come back with me." "Go back." Shen Manting sneered. "Like a parasite, I'll be imprisoned and raped by you?" Shen Manting's eyes had turned red, and her eyes were filled with obvious hatred. Shen Luoan's hair stood on end when he heard such a sensitive word from her mouth. He looked at Shen Manting in disbelief, as if he was looking at a lunatic. But the last word, brother, was a resounding slap on Shen Luoan's face. The baby cried even louder, as if it was crying out its mother's ruthless contempt. Chapter 1966. He was so strong that Shen Manting immediately staggered. Her body fell hard on the sofa and she almost fell. She desperately tried to steady herself before she could stand. Shen Luoan's face was full of anger. His jaw was tight and the veins on his temples were bulging. He looked at Shen Manting with obvious anger in his eyes. He grabbed the back of her neck and pressed her down, forcing her to look at the crying baby lying on the sofa. "Look at your son and tell him that he's a bastard." His voice was not soft, and it was filled with rage. Shen Manting's neck was pressed down hard. She looked at her son, whose face was red from crying, and desperately tried to push him away. But Shen Luoan was so strong that she couldn't move him no matter how hard she struggled. Tears fell uncontrollably. "Let go of me." Shen Manting tried to pull back, but she could only grab nothing. Her hands fluttered but couldn't touch anything. Her heart was terribly empty. The feeling of despair made her scream almost crazily. "Shen Luoan, you beast. You're a pervert." Shen Luoan only felt that his anger was burning. He pressed her face in the direction of little Moon. The baby seemed to be frightened and cried even harder. He had never cried like this before. The commotion attracted the attention of Aunt Lin, who lived next door. The door wasn't locked, so Aunt Lin easily came in. She was shocked to see the scene inside. She rushed forward and shouted, Sir, what are you doing? Manting has just finished her confinement. How can you fight?" Shen Luoan's anger subsided a little when he heard someone else's voice. He loosened his grip slightly, and Shen Manting collapsed to the ground. Her neatly combed hair had all come loose. It stuck to her face and neck, looking miserable and disheveled. The new clothes she was wearing made Shen Manting feel that the good feeling she had for the past month was a complete joke. Her tears were like a dam that had collapsed, gurgling down endlessly. She looked at the baby in front of her, as if he had lost consciousness. His expression was empty and numb. The baby had never cried like this before, and his voice soon became hoarse. Aunt Lin felt sorry for him and went forward saying, "Poor child." But before she could touch him, she heard a broken scream. "Don't touch him." Shen Manting stood up like a madwoman and held the baby in her arms. Shen Manting broke down in tears. She hugged the baby and burst into tears. Aunt Lin had no idea what had happened, but when she saw Shen Manting in such a state, her heart ached and she was frightened. She looked at Shen Luo and blankly and asked, "What happened? Why did they suddenly start fighting?" Shen Luo gritted his teeth and closed his eyes. "She's crazy. You're the crazy one," Shen Manting roared. "You're a lunatic. You've always been a lunatic, a devil, and a psychopath." Shen Luo's face darkened as he walked forward. "Are you done scolding me?" Shen Manting was frightened. She held the baby in her arms and retreated. She immediately turned around and ran into the room. Shen Luo quickly caught up with her, but he was still a step too late. Shen Manting seemed to have exhausted all her strength. She slammed the door shut and used her back to block it. "Ah!" Shen Luo screamed in agony. Shen Manting glanced at his fingers that were still in the gap of the door. She was startled and immediately loosened her grip. When she saw that he immediately withdrew his hand, she pressed it back down and quickly locked it. Bang! Bang! Chapter 1967. Shen Luo's voice was very loud, and his hand was very heavy. Aunt Lin saw his bruised fingers and was shocked. She said, "Don't be too hard. You're scaring the baby. Don't scare Manting." Shen Manting heard the noise outside and sneered. Then she looked at the window in the room. The window was not high and relatively spacious. There was a fence at the back, less than half a meter inside, with beautiful flowers and plants. Shen Manting looked at the baby and put him down. She rummaged through her belongings, including her wallet, ID card and bank card. She still had some savings from her previous job, which was enough to support her to find a new job and live for a while. She gritted her teeth and couldn't stop her tears from rolling down. Forget it. Her life would not be easy if she stayed here. Shen Luo would also take her child away, and she would have to live an inhuman life again. She had just given birth, and he hadn't gotten the child yet. So Shen Luo had a little conscience and didn't force her. When the child was in his hands and she let down her guard, he would not only get a child, but also a cheap sex slave. "I have to go." Shen Luo was still banging on the door. Shen Manting roared, "You're so noisy. Don't you think the baby is crying enough?" Sure enough, the other side soon quieted down. Shen Manting calmed down a little. She took 2 bags of diapers and stuffed them into her big backpack. Then she placed the baby by the window and opened the window wide. She tried to be as gentle as possible. Suddenly, the sound of the door being unlocked came. Shen Manting was shocked. She immediately pulled the baby over and held him firmly. She immediately crouched down. But it was too late. As soon as Shen Luo came in, he saw Shen Manting flash past the window. His anger, which had calmed down with great difficulty, surged again. "Shen Manting!" Shen Manting roared. Shen Manting trembled and began to climb over the railing in a hurry with the baby in her arms. But the railing was a little high. Shen Manting tried to climb over it, but she couldn't get over it, so she immediately trotted. Shen Luo had already climbed out of the window and grabbed her backpack. Shen Manting screamed and shouted, "Don't touch me. Get away." "Oh!" Shen Luo uncovered her mouth and hugged her tightly from behind. Auntie Lin was on the verge of tears. He hurriedly ran out of the door and waited outside to receive them. Shen Manting cried so hard that the infant's voice became hoarse. Auntie Lin stomped her feet in distress. "Give me the baby now. If you hurt the baby, you'll die of heartache." Shen Manting's mouth was covered, but she cried even more desperately. She hugged the child tightly and refused to let go. He gritted his teeth, but in the end he gave in and said, "We're not going back to the capital. We're not going back to the capital. Give the baby to Aunt Lin first. He's your son. Are you going to crush him to death?" Shen Manting's eyes were red and swollen, and she slowly regained her composure. The baby's voice was hoarse, but he was still crying. Her face was so red that it was frightening. Shen Manting was shocked. She quickly loosened her grip on him and handed him over. Aunt Lin hugged the baby and coaxed him. Little Moon gradually calmed down, perhaps because he was tired from crying. Shen Manting also calmed down a little, but the passers-by would look at them a few times. Shen Luo's expression was ugly, but he was much calmer than before. Chapter 1968. He looked down at Shin Manting in front of him and tried to let go. Sure enough, Shin Manting was no longer moving. However, her whole body seemed to have lost strength and softly collapsed. Aunt Lin was shocked and exclaimed, "Manting!" Shin Luoan reacted quickly and immediately held her in his arms. However, the weight of such a big living person suddenly fell on Shin Luo, and coupled with the size of a person's backpack, made Shin Luoan stumble. "Shin Manting!" Shin Luoan called out uncertainly, then immediately picked her up and shouted, "Call the ambulance!" Shin Manting fainted suddenly without any warning. When Shin Luoan carried her back, he saw her eyes swollen like walnuts. Aunt Lin had taken care of Shin Manting for a month. Although they were not very close, they still had some feelings for each other. Seeing them quarrel like this, she was anxious and distressed. She stomped her feet and scolded Shin Luo, "A woman gave birth to your child. You can't do anything, no matter how serious the matter is. Manting is not very lively. It's not easy for her to get better and be more cheerful recently, but it's all because of you." Aunt Lin was about the same age as Mrs. Shin Luo, and did not say a word in the face of her scolding. He sat down with Shin Manting in his arms and pressed her face. "Hey, at least avoid the child when you quarrel. The baby is still so young. If he is scared, he may really be frightened. If anything happens to him, it's all your parents' fault." Shin Luo felt even more annoyed, but he still pursed his lips and did not say a word. Auntie Lin finally managed to coax the baby to sleep. She sighed. The ambulance soon arrived. Shin Luo put her on the stretcher and then took the baby. "When she wakes up, she will probably look for the baby. I'll take him with me." Shin Luo looked at Aunt Lin and quickly got into the ambulance. After the doctor asked about the cause of the disease, he put Shin Manting on N4. But after Shin Luo explained the cause and effect, the doctor said, "The new mother's mood is unstable, and it may be postpartum depression. She has been avoiding you, and there is a 90% chance that it may be because of this." Yes. Shin Luo was also a medical student, and he had vaguely guessed something. He was not surprised that Shin Manting would suffer from postpartum depression. She had sealed herself up too tightly. Even the slightest bit of disturbance would feel like someone had touched her reverse scale. But during this period of time, Shin Manting had obviously improved. However, just like what Aunt Lin had said, his violence had scared away all the improvements in her. Shin Luo sat by the bed and covered his face with his hands. He sighed heavily. He was too impatient. He didn't have the confidence to take care of her and the child without Aunt Lin, so he couldn't wait to bring her back to the capital. Firstly, it was to let his parents see their son. Secondly, he wanted to give her and the child a proper status. The baby wanted to register, and so did she. But now it was all destroyed. "Woo, woo," a baby's voice. Shin Luo turned his head to the side. The baby was pouting and looked like he was about to cry. He picked up the baby and saw Shin Manting twitching from the corner of his eye. She was startled and opened her eyes in an instant. There was an obvious fear on his face. After seeing him, the fear in her eyes intensified. Chapter 1969. Her movements were a little violent, and she tore the flexible tube of the infusion. Shin Luo clearly saw blood spurting out of the back of her hand. He was shocked and quickly handed the child over. Here. Don't be afraid." He didn't know if he was frightened by Shin Manting or for some other reason. The baby, who was about to cry, suddenly cried out. His voice had been hoarse from crying, and now it sounded helpless and miserable. Shin Manting's eyes also turned red, and she gently rubbed her face against her son's. "Little Moon, don't cry." Shin Luo looked at the back of her hand and said, "You're still on the infusion. Don't move. Get lost." Shin Manting shrank back, and half of the infusion needle that was stuck on her hand was lifted. The blood stained the back of her hand, and Shin Luo's heart tightened. But he didn't lean over, and quickly pressed the call bell at the bedside. The nurse soon came over. When she saw the back of Shin Manting's hand, she frowned and came forward. She rebuked. "How could you do this? Do you want to die? If your blood vessels rupture, how are you going to take care of your child?" As she spoke, She had already picked up the medical equipment. He looked up and saw that Shin Manting was still holding the child. The nurse had a look of disdain on her face. She laughed and said, "What are you looking at? Take the child away. Don't you see that your wife is bleeding?" When Shen Luoan heard this, he moved forward a little. He tentatively reached out his hand, but Shin Manting held the baby tightly. The baby's miserable cries made his heart tremble. The nurse finally saw it. It wasn't that the man didn't want to hold the baby, but the woman didn't want to give it to him. You can hold the baby at any time. If your hand is crippled, you won't be able to hold the baby anymore. The nurse glanced at the back of her hand that had begun to drip blood. She secretly clicked her tongue and said, "You really don't want this hand anymore? When your baby grows up and asks you how your hand is crippled, will you be able to tell him?" Most of the words were threatening, but Shin Manting was still frightened. She slightly released the baby, and the crying became slightly softer. Shin Luo and hurried forward and carried the baby over. He gently coaxed the baby, looking like a good father and husband. Shin Manting found it ridiculous. She sneered and stretched out her hand. The blood dripped onto the blanket. The nurse frowned and said, "Sai, there was no need to dirty the blanket. Why did you have to quarrel in the hospital? Besides, the child is here. No matter how angry you are, you shouldn't throw a tantrum in front of the child. Don't think that the child doesn't know. They just don't understand, but they will remember it." Shin Manting and Shin Luo and remained silent. After the nurse was done, she applied the 4 drip on Shin Manting's other hand. "Don't ruin it again. The last bag of water will be gone after we hang it up. Behave yourself." The nurse glanced at Shin Luoan and said, "Look after your wife. There's only 1 bag left. Don't argue. Your wife's health is more important." "Thank you," Shin Luoan said softly. When he looked back at Shin Manting, she was already lying down. The crying of the baby in her arms had stopped, and it was much quieter. Only a pair of watery eyes were still open. His dark round eyes resembled Shin Manting's. "Are you hungry? I'll buy you some food." They didn't eat much during lunch. Shin Manting must be hungry after making such a fuss. But Shin Manting didn't respond. Shin Luo suddenly came to his senses. Chapter 1970. As soon as this thought came to her, it was like a hook stuck in her heart, and she couldn't pull it out. Shin Luo sat on the edge of the bed with Little Moon in his arms and said, "I was wrong about what happened today." Shin Manting had already closed her eyes, but when she heard this, she suddenly tightened her grip on the quilt, and her knuckles turned slightly pale. "I have a bad temper, but I'm trying to change it." Shin Luo rarely spoke in such a humble manner. Shin Manting's restless heart suddenly calmed down a little. The original fear, hatred, and disgust. With this soft voice, they all hid away as if they had seen a ghost. Shin Manting's heart ached slightly, but she still kept her eyes closed. She clearly heard Shin Luo take a deep breath and said, "I'll try not to lose my temper in the future. The baby may be hungry, give him some milk." Shin Manting's heart was suddenly calm, as if she had suddenly seen a ghost. It was extremely sarcastic. She clutched the quilt, and there were drops of water dripping from her closed eyes. She didn't make a sound, and her body trembled slightly. The sound of low sobbing could be clearly heard, and it was restrained and soft. "You said so much, but you just want me to feed your son." Shin Luo's body stiffened, and he turned his head to look. Shin Manting buried her face in the quilt, and only a small part of her white forehead was exposed. "Shin Luo everyone is so tired, why don't we part ways?" Shin Luo's heart suddenly sank. "I'll raise the baby, and I'll pay you back all your expenses this month. Give me some time, and I'll definitely pay you back." Her voice was choked, and it was sullen under the quilt. Shin Luo sneered and his voice was filled with contempt. "Can you pay me back?" Shin Manting didn't directly answer his question, but said, "You forced me during those days, and we have no feelings for each other at all." After waking up, Shin Manting was calmer than ever. However, the words that came out of his mouth were really more annoying than the previous one. "Whether there are feelings or not, it's not up to you to decide," Shin Luo announced in a deep voice. "Little Moon is my son, and as his father, I have the right and responsibility to raise him. Do you want to take the child away? Not in this lifetime. Then I can only go through the legal process. Shin Manting had already stopped sobbing, and her voice sounded a little threatening. You raped me, and this child is the best proof. Heh. Shin Luoan sneered. Who can prove that it was a rape? You've already given birth to a child. If you really hate me that much, why did you give birth to him? Shin Manting froze. He bent down and whispered in her ear. Actually, you love me, don't you? She was dependent on him. For a long time, Shin Luoan had this feeling. She hated him and wanted to break free from him, but she couldn't. Shin Manting's heart was actually a little twisted. He knew it better than anyone else. However, when Shin Manting heard this, she suddenly burst into laughter. He lifted the quilt and immediately felt a gust of hot air on his face. In a moment he met Shin Manting's red eyes. Who do you think would fall in love with a rapist? Shin Luo, and was shocked to see her like this. There was a thought in his mind that was trying to stop his desire to verbally attack. Chapter 1971. Have you ever heard of Stockholm Syndrome? It was a strange yet familiar term. Shin Manting opened her eyes and looked at him. It was a psychological disease. The abused developed a distorted mentality of dependence, habit, and even love for the abuser. Shin Manting used to think that it was an extreme perverted mentality. It was no exception now. But when Shin Luoan mentioned it, she suddenly remembered it. She was stunned for a moment, then laughed and said, I didn't expect you to be so good at daydreaming. Shin Luo, and was not angry when he heard this. He quickly stood up with the baby in his arms. The baby was still awake and didn't cry. He blinked his eyes and looked at him. He handed the baby over and said, I'll ask Aunt Lin to bring some food. No need. Shin Manting took the baby. Let's take this opportunity to make things clear. Don't even think about it. Shin Luoan's face darkened. Aunt Lin's daughter is about to give birth. It's impossible for her to take care of us for the rest of our lives. The best way is to go back to the capital in a few days and get married at the Civil Affairs Bureau. You want to marry me? Shin Manting's pale face was a little shocked. She had never thought of this question. Marry him? She didn't even dare to think about it. My child wants a mother. Shin Manting almost roared. This is my child. Shin Luoan looked at her for a long time and said word by word. He also wants a father. He was unexpectedly calm. She thought that he would be furious. Shin Manting sneered. Her eyes were firm and her words were almost squeezed out from between her teeth. Shin Luoan, I can't marry you. Shin Luoan didn't answer. He turned his head and turned to make a phone call. He told Aunt Lin to send food and then hung up the phone. Shin Manting held the baby and was quiet for a while. Then she lifted her clothes and fed the baby. No one spoke again. The atmosphere was unexpectedly harmonious. Shin Luoan didn't lose his temper, so she couldn't make a fuss. However, this feeling made her feel uncomfortable. It shouldn't be like this. She actually wanted Shin Luo, and to lose his temper, so that she could take the baby away and never see him again. She wanted the child, but this man was not her husband. After feeding the baby soon fell asleep. There's no more water. Shin Luo, and looked up at the medicine bag above his head and pressed the call button. The nurse came over to remove the needle. After resting for a while, Shin Manting said, Tell Aunt Lin not to come anymore. It's not over yet. Have you noticed? Your emotions are very unstable. I suspect that you have postpartum depression. Let's go to the psychiatrist together. Another new move? Shin Manting held the baby in her arms and looked at him. You want the doctor to determine that I'm mentally ill and can't take care of the child, and then take the child away from me, right? Shin Manting felt that her suspicion was reasonable. However, Shin Luoan's face darkened even further. He sneered. I think you're not just suffering from depression. You're also suffering from paranoia. Shin Manting didn't say anything. She looked at him coldly. Shin Luo, and suppressed his anger and said, If I wanted to take the child away, I could have done so after you gave birth. At that time, you were weak. If I took action, you wouldn't have had a chance to resist. I will die. So I didn't do that. Shenluo, and interrupted her. His tone was a little heavy. I will have a better chance later. After you fall asleep, I will quietly take the child away. Will you know? Chapter 1972. Yes. During this period of time, she had been too relaxed with him. When Shenluo first moved in, she was still a little wary. But later, she became more and more accustomed to his existence and completely let down her guard. It was just as he said. If he wanted to take the baby away suddenly, she wouldn't be able to find out. Shenluo saw her expression and laughed. Don't think that everyone is as heartless as you. Shen Manting, no one in our family has treated you badly during your time in the Shen family. You know very well how good grandmother has been to you. So what? Shen Manting found it ridiculous. You were good to me because you felt guilty. In the beginning, I really treated you as family, but what happened later? Later, when Shenluo was drunk, he pressed her against the sink in the bathroom. He violently and heavily invaded her. After the first time, there would be a second and a third time. At that time, he still had a wife. She couldn't believe that he could sleep with his sister behind his family's back. From that day, she knew that he was a pervert. A pervert that she had never seen before. In the beginning, she felt extremely guilty toward Yi Yu. All she could think about was getting married. Only when she got married, and was with Oming would he let her go. However, Shenluo had imprisoned her in a dark room over and over again. He had made her do dirty things that couldn't be exposed to the light. No woman could stand that kind of life. Shen Manting still had a lingering fear when she thought of that time. Later, Shenluo narrowed his eyes. Did I not treat you well? Haha. Shen Manting sneered but didn't say anything. I gave you whatever you wanted. I didn't have to worry about food or clothing. Except for being a little rough with you sometimes, I don't think I've done anything wrong to you. Shenluo looked at her. Their child was lying beside her. Manting, now that we have a son, don't be angry with me anymore. Let's get married, raise little Moon together, and build a happy family. Isn't that good? Shen Manting looked at him coldly. A happy family? Marriage? Except for being a little rough sometimes, he didn't do anything wrong to her? Haha. Shen Manting looked away and sneered. Shenluo's anger, which he had suppressed with great difficulty, flared up again. What kind of expression is that? Shen Manting sneered. Don't you think what you're saying is ridiculous? Laughable. Shenluo stared at her. I treat you with sincerity. Every word I say is true. I really want to marry you. I really want to give our child a home. I really want to give you a proper status. Is that ridiculous? I won't be with you, Shenluo. Shen Manting looked at him with sadness in her eyes. Let me go. I'm tired. Really? Shen Manting's eyes were filled with sorrow. His eyes were slightly red, and his face was pale. She was looking at him with a rare calmness. She was calm and serious. His words made Shenluo's heart clench. Even his anger seemed to be blocked by her words, unable to go up or down. After staring at her for a long time, Shenluo suddenly stood up. Shen Manting was shocked. Just as she was wondering what he was going to do, he suddenly turned around. Chapter 1973. Shenluo left suddenly. For a moment, Shen Manting didn't come to her senses. Manting. It was Aunt Lin who asked tentatively. Aunt Lin came in with a thermos and looked at it. Where's Sir? She asked. I don't know. Shen Manting leaned against the headboard. I'm hungry. Oh, it's here. Aunt Lin put down the thermos and poured out a bowl of soup with a lid. She said, I made this tonic soup early in the morning. There are herbs and meat in it. I'll scoop it up for you after you finish it. Shen Manting looked at the ginseng chicken soup in her hand and took a sip after a long while. Hey, it's not easy for a young couple to live together. You can't quarrel even if it's for the sake of the child. Aunt Lin tried to persuade her. When the child grows up, you'll find that it'll be over soon. Sir has a bad temper, so you should be more tolerant. In fact, he has a good heart and cares about you very much. It's just that he may not be able to say anything nice. Shin Manting didn't say anything and listened to her in silence. Manting, the baby is still young and needs the love of his parents. As a mother, you shouldn't quarrel with him in front of him, let alone hit him. When Shin Manting heard this, she suddenly felt sad. Tears welled up in his eyes uncontrollably, and they rolled down his face. Her tears dripped into the bowl, but Shin Manting laughed. In your eyes, I'm being unreasonable, am I? Shin Manting's tone was not very good. She smiled, but it was uglier than crying. Aunt Lin was speechless. After a while she said, I didn't say that, but it's impossible for Sir to be so angry for no reason. You must have said something wrong. During this period of time, Shin Luo and was quite good. Shin Manting, on the other hand, looked like she had seen a ghost when she saw him. Sometimes she avoided him like a snake or scorpion, and sometimes she was very natural. However, the relationship between the two of them was never intimate. It was obvious that Shin Manting was afraid of him. But Aunt Lin saw how well Shin Luo and treated Shin Manting. In all fairness, Shin Luo and really had no other problems except for his bad temper. Shin Manting felt even more ridiculous. But she couldn't laugh. Now even outsiders felt that she was being unreasonable. No matter what, Shin Luo always had a reason. There was a reason why he got angry, a reason why he hit her, and a reason why he humiliated her. Just because he has money? Just because he was the real employer? Shin Manting looked at the chicken soup in her hand, and suddenly tilted her head back and drank it in one gulp. He returned the cup and said, Then if he and I are destined to be separated, do you think I can afford to raise the child? Auntie Lin was shocked. Did she want a divorce? Her heart was beating like a drum. Aunt Lin guessed for a moment before she said, I think you should raise him with Sir. Children need a home. No matter if it's a father or a mother, you can't have one less. I can't live with him. Shin Manting stared at Aunt Lin. He's my brother. Aunt Lin gasped when she heard that. He stared at her in disbelief, as if he had seen a ghost. A pair of eyes stared into her face, trying to find some semblance of a mischievous expression. But no, not one bit. Shin Manting was very serious. When she saw the expression on Aunt Lin's face, she actually felt a little happy that Aunt Lin shared a common enemy with her. Chapter 1974. It's hard to believe, isn't it? Shin Manting sneered. We share the same surname. Haven't you ever doubted it? Of course Aunt Lin doubted it. But what could the same surname prove? There were many couples with the same surname. What made her curious was that Shin Manting had always been afraid of Shin Luo. She had thought that there was a knot between them. But she didn't expect that to be the reason. Brother and sister? Biological brother and sister? Manting, are you kidding? Aunt Lin couldn't believe it. You don't look alike at all, and, if you are really brother and sister, why did you give birth to the child? Aren't you afraid? Aren't you afraid of deformity? Now the child won't be deformed, but the child born to biological brother and sister is likely to be mentally retarded, have cerebral palsy, or even have invisible diseases. Such a price was too heavy. For a child, it would be better not to have been born into this world in the first place if such a fate were to befall him. Shin Manting heard Aunt Lin's words and smiled. But at the same time, tears fell. We are not related by blood. Aunt Lin immediately breathed a sigh of relief. That's good, that's good. You haven't answered me yet, Shin Manting repeated the question. Who do you think the child will be better off with? Aunt Lin frowned and said, You don't want to be with him. Who would want to be husband and wife with their own brother? How can a woman bear to give up the baby? Aunt Lin was also a mother, so she naturally understood this feeling. It was impossible to give up the blood relationship with the child. But now as an outsider, she heard Shin Manting's words and sighed softly. But in all fairness, if you are destined not to be together, then it will be better for the baby to be with Sir. That was the expected answer. Shin Manting felt like a knife was being twisted in her heart, but she still didn't give up. She asked why. First of all, Sir's financial ability is better than yours. As a woman, your ability to earn money is inferior to that of a man. Moreover, your health is not very good. I'm not in poor health. You are weak and anemic. These are all problems. These small problems have to be taken care of, or they will accidentally become serious problems. Aunt Lin looked at her. Moreover, the baby needs a good material life. Sir can provide these, but can you? She couldn't. If she took care of a baby, she would not have the ability or energy to earn money. Once she lost her source of income, she might not even be able to support herself. Manting, sir, is actually quite nice. I got it, Shen Manting interrupted. I got it. His voice was very low, with an indiscernible stillness. What do you know? Auntie Lin looked at her. You're still not in good health. You need to stay on the drip for a few days to nourish your body. Don't quarrel with Sir again. Yes. Shen Manting lowered her head and looked sideways at the infant lying next to her. I know. You can go back now. Aunt Lin sensed that something was amiss. Are you all right? It's okay. You can go. Leave the soup here. I'll drink it myself when I'm hungry. Aunt Lin was relieved to hear that. If he knew how to drink soup, it meant that he wouldn't do anything stupid. Auntie Lin looked at the time and said, All right then, I'm leaving. When Sir comes back later, you can ask him to talk to you. Yes. Chapter 1975. The baby was already asleep. He clenched his fists and breathed steadily. Shen Manting looked at the baby next to her for a long time before getting out of bed. After she went to the bathroom, a nurse came over and asked, Shen Manting? Yes. Shen Manting looked up at her. The nurse glanced at her and said, Go to the psychiatry department. Your husband is waiting for you there. Psychiatry department? Husband? Shen Manting smiled and replied, Got it. The nurse didn't care and turned around to leave. Shen Manting put on her shoes and walked to the psychiatry department with the baby in her arms. The psychiatry department was on the 9th floor. When she arrived, she saw Shen Luo, and standing by the window in the corridor. He reached out his hand when he saw her. Shen Manting glanced at him, and then handed the baby to him. To be honest, she was also very curious about the results of the examination. She sat in front of the doctor, but the doctor didn't rush to ask any sensitive questions. Instead, he chatted with her about daily life. Shen Manting was a little wary at first, but she gradually let her guard down. How old is the baby? 1 month. I just got out of confinement. Oh. Then is the milk he's been drinking recently breast milk or mixed with milk powder? Both. Shen Manting frowned and said, But does this have anything to do with me? The doctor smiled and said, It doesn't matter. I just want to know more. Shen Manting felt a little impatient and her eyes were a little unfocused. The doctor didn't say anything and lowered his head to write something in his notebook. Shen Luo and waited for her outside. He held the baby in his arms and felt lonely in his heart. The baby was theirs, but Shen Manting didn't want to be with him. It seemed that she wanted to leave with the baby. Shen Luo and only felt more irritated. He looked at the distant sky and sighed. Shen Manting had been in there for more than an hour, but there was still no movement. The baby woke up but didn't cry. A pair of black eyes looked at Shen Luo and pure and bright. Shen Manting walked out of the room with her head lowered, and didn't say a word. Shen Luo stood up and asked, How is it? Shen Manting smiled and said, Postpartum depression and paranoia. Shen Luo was stunned by these two terms. Shen Manting walked around him and whispered, Are you happy? What are you talking about? Shen Luo frowned deeply. How can I be happy when you're like this? Did they give you a prescription? Okay. Shen Manting took out a form and said, Let's go and pay the bill. Shen Manting was behaving strangely today. He seemed to have become abnormally calm. He was terrifyingly calm. Shen Luo took the list and handed the baby over. Shen Manting carried the baby to the nursery and returned to the ward. She was admitted to the hospital at the last minute, so everything was at home. They sat on the edge of the bed and waited for Shen Luo's return before they went back together. It was almost dinner time. Aunt Lin had already prepared dinner. She glanced at Shen Manting and asked, Manting, did you bring the thermos flask back? Shen Manting suddenly remembered. I forgot. Auntie Lin felt a little regretful. Forget it. Let's eat. Give me the baby. Shin Manting handed the baby over and washed her hands. She picked up a bowl of rice and ate quietly. Shin Luo and sat in front of her and couldn't stand it anymore. He said, "What's wrong with you? Tell me. Don't look so lifeless. It's an eyesore." Chapter 1976. Shin Luo and didn't say anything. However, his eyes couldn't help but take a few more glances at her. "What did the doctor say to you?" "No." Shin Manting continued eating. "What else can I say? I'll probably say that my emotions are unstable, or something like that." His expression was very calm, as if he was narrating something that was not a big deal. Auntie Lin couldn't help but ask. Shin Luo and didn't seem very happy, but he was also restraining his temper. No one made a sound. After dinner, Shin Manting walked back to her room. She didn't even pick up the baby and locked the door. Who knew what she was doing inside? Aunt Lin held the baby in her arms and felt a little strange. She walked over to Shin Luo and then sat down in front of him. She said, "Something doesn't seem right today." Shin Luo and also felt that something was wrong. He glanced at the baby in Aunt Lin's arms and said, "Maybe he's in a bad mood. I'll go check on him later." Could he have run away? I think she's been acting strangely all day. Aunt Lin stared at the door of the room. In her mind, she imagined Shin Manting escaping through the window. Shin Luo and thought it was nonsense. He smiled and looked at the baby. "Don't worry. She won't be able to bear to part with little Moon." Auntie Lin also looked at the baby. She nodded and said, "That's true. The baby hasn't been weaned yet. No mother would be willing to do that." However, Shin Manting stayed in there for a long time. The baby fell asleep and woke up, crying. Auntie Lin touched it and found that it was defecation. "Sir, please bring me a diaper," he said. Then he whispered, "Go and check on Manting. Don't let her get sick from being cooped up in there alone." Shin Luo nodded and took out his keys with ease. However, the resistance of the door was great. There seemed to be something blocking it. He pushed it with all his might, but there was nothing inside. The wind whistled in through the window and made Shin Luo shiver. Whoosh! Today the wind is very strong. The things in the room are blown from side to side. The quilt was messy and there was no light in the room. Shin Luo immediately felt that something was wrong. He was shocked and immediately turned on the lights. The light was turned on, illuminating everything in the room. However, the room was empty. The wardrobe was open, and the windows were wide open. It was as if they were telling the whereabouts of Shin Manting. Aunt Lin had never expected that Shin Manting would abandon her child in order to leave. After being shocked, she looked at Shin Luo in a different light. She didn't believe it before, but now. Could it be that they were really siblings? Shin Manting didn't go far. Firstly, he was reluctant to part with her. Secondly, if he were to leave now, it would be too obvious. Since he was going to leave, he would leave thoroughly. She didn't want to live like that anymore. The inhuman abuse, the lowly life of living under someone else's roof. Even though she lived alone, she could support herself. As for the child, since the Shen family wanted him, they would not mistreat him. Shin Manting lay in her room and closed her eyes. Unknowingly, he fell asleep. But not long after, he was woken up by the rising milk. She frowned and realized that her clothes were wet. She lifted them up and saw that they were red and swollen. It was hard like a rock. White liquid dripped down. It was a ghastly sight to behold, along with the red and swollen veins. Looking at the time, it was already morning. She had not fed the baby for an entire night. When he realized this, he suddenly felt a lump in his throat. Chapter 1977. It was rare for her to sleep so soundly, but when she woke up, she found that everything she had was gone. It was like a dream. Shin Manting got up and squeezed out the milk. She freshened up and turned on her cell phone in the room. Her cell phone had been turned off since last night. As soon as she turned it on, there were many missed calls and calls. She immediately turned off the signal and connected to the wireless network in the guest house. When she opened WeChat, there were many messages from Shin Luoan. "Shin Luoan, where are you? Shin Luon. The baby can't stop crying and has been looking for his mother. Where are you? When she saw this, Shin Manting's tears, which she had tried so hard to stop, burst again. Her shoulders trembled and she cried bitterly. Shin Luon, voice message. As soon as she turned on the phone, she heard the baby crying. Aunt Lin's voice came from the other side. Manting, the baby can't find his mother. His voice is hoarse from crying. How can you leave just like that? Shin Luon, voice message. In a low and calm voice he said, I know you hate me, but the baby is innocent. After all, you gave birth to him. Why did you leave him with me like this? Shin Luo's voice was clear, but it still couldn't cover the baby's crying behind him. Yes, the baby is innocent. Shin Manting was a little shaken. After all, she gave birth to the baby. Why did she give him the baby? What if Shin Luo and found a stepmother in the future? Would she abuse her child? But if she took the baby with her, she couldn't afford to raise him. What should she do? Shin Luo frantically searched for her. He used his connections and found surveillance cameras. He tried everything he could think of. However, the police said that Shin Manting had no record of staying in any hotel or leaving the city. In the next few days, Shin Manting seemed to have disappeared. Shin Luo couldn't stand it anymore and sent her a message. Aunt Lin has left. I can't take care of the baby alone. I want to take him back to the capital for his parents to take care of. After thinking about it, he felt that his tone might be too soft, so he added, no matter what, the baby needs to drink milk. He can't just drink milk powder. The nutrition won't keep up. I want to send the baby back. I will wait for you at home for 2 days. If you don't come, then this baby has nothing to do with you. Shin Manting looked at the message and was slightly lost. She had been staring at her phone the whole time. She could see clearly what Shin Luo was typing. He was typing again. Shin Manting received a message that sent a chill down her spine. He said, I will tell the child that his mother is dead. However, Shin Manting didn't seem to have seen his message at all. She didn't appear at all. Shin Luo couldn't take it anymore and sent the child back to the capital. Before the plane took off, Shin Luo sent her one last message. You're so cruel. You're the one who didn't want him. It's useless even if you regret it in the future. When Shin Jilia got home from work, his eyes widened when he saw the infant. This child is yours? Shin Luo glanced at him and nodded. No way, where's Sister Manting? Dead. Shin Jilia looked at him in disbelief. How did he die? Shin Luo didn't reply. He carried the infant into the room. Shin Jilia caught up with her and asked, didn't you go to take care of Sister Manting? How did you die? Are you lying to me? Shin Luo didn't answer, but the baby started to cry. Chapter 1978. Why do you have so much to say? Shin Luo looked at him with displeasure. Shin Jilia was even more certain of his guess and said angrily, you're a beast. Shin Luo didn't retort and focused on changing the baby's diaper. When Shin Jilia saw that, he turned around and walked out in exasperation. After Shin Jilia and Yi Qianqian got married, Yi Qianqian couldn't wait to post it on her moments. That night, she received a lot of likes. She was elated. Look, so many people are giving us their blessings. Yi Qianqian sat on the bed, wearing only a nightgown. So many people are asking me when we're holding our wedding. How should I reply? Truthfully, Shin Jilia took off his shoes and climbed into bed. It's so cold, he said. It's not cold. Yi Qianqian glanced at him. Are you feeling weak? Me. Weak. Shin Jilia raised his eyebrows slightly and pounced on her. A man has to pay for saying that. Don't move. Yi Qianqian lay down. Aunt Flo's here. Don't even think about touching me. Shin Jilia was instantly defeated. He looked at her and sighed. Aunt Flo. Why is there such a thing as Aunt Flo? The arrival of her relatives meant that she wasn't pregnant. That wasn't good news for Shin Jilia. When Yi Qianqian saw that, she threw her phone aside and hugged him. Because I'm a woman. Shin Jilia lay down and hugged her. You're my woman from now on. Honey, go to sleep. Yes, hubby. Yi Qianqian smiled, but she didn't go to sleep immediately. Instead, she picked up her phone and continued to reply to her moments. Shinjulia's heart warmed when he saw her soft and happy face. He gently reached out and stroked the ends of her hair. "Grandma came to talk to me today," he said. "Huh? What did she say?" Yi Qianqian asked without looking up. "Since we're already married, Grandma hopes that you can stop your work in Kingstown and come live in the capital." Yi Qianqian paused and looked up at him. Shinjulia looked a little conflicted as he said, "You know how old people think. They're very conservative. Besides, I feel that since I'm working in the capital, there's no reason for us to move to a different place even after we're married. We've been in a different place for so long. We can't possibly get married again, can we?" Yi Qianqian turned off the screen and looked at Shinjulia. "Aren't we not officially married yet?" Yi Qianqian looked at Shinjulia. "Let's wait until after the wedding. I think, isn't it a little too sudden now? Recently, I've been on the rise. I might be promoted to the position of chief editor." She had been working in that position for a few years. In fact, a promotion was not necessary. She had never been obsessed with a promotion or anything like that. But it was the most practical recognition of her work. Once he was promoted, he would tell his father about it, and his father would definitely be very pleased. This was a crucial period. Resign. Yi Qianqian was indignant. Shinjulia understood. He gently stroked the back of her head and nodded. "Yeah, okay." She looked at Shinjulia in front of her. Although he hadn't said anything, Yi Qianqian felt an inexplicable sense of grievance. Since she was married, she had to move in with her in-laws. Since she was married, did that mean that she had to give up her job and everything she had worked so hard for? Chapter 1979. However, this was the path she had chosen. It seemed to be too late to regret now. He took a deep breath and said, "What Grandma means is that you're under too much pressure at work. I know about your current job. When you're busy, you have to work overtime for several weeks. You don't even have a break on Saturdays and Sundays. How tiring is that?" Yi Qianqian was speechless. "But I've been doing this for so many years." Yi Qianqian whispered, "I'm used to it. It makes me feel terrible to quit just like that." "Humph." Shinjulia held her close. "You have to be picky about your body. It must have something to do with the stress of work. Otherwise, why haven't you gotten pregnant after so long? Why don't you say that you might be the reason?" Yi Qianqian pushed him away. "Aren't you also as busy as a dog at work? You have to work overtime every day to take care of patients. Why are you blaming me? Maybe you've worked overtime too." Shinjulia smiled. He hugged her and whispered in her ear, "Don't think that I don't know that your period is a mess. I've known you for a long time, and you're still saying that it's not because of work?" Yi Qianqian was clearly unconvinced. "I'm not very accurate in the first place. All the more reason for you to recuperate." Shinjulia held her down. "Listen to me. Rest for a while, and then we'll go on a honeymoon, okay?" "Honeymoon?" Yi Qianqian's eyes began to sparkle as she asked, "Where are we going? Where do you want to go?" "Of course I have to go somewhere romantic." Yi Qianqian thought for a moment. She lowered her head and picked up her phone. "Let me do a search." "There's no need for that." Shinjulia took the phone from her hand. "How about Phuket?" "Phuket, Thailand?" "Yes, sure." Yi Qianqian wasn't picky. "It's been a long time since I've seen the sea. The weather there seems pretty good." "That's pretty good." Shinjulia couldn't help but kiss her on the lips. "I'll wait for you. I've already spoken to the hospital. You can come anytime. Your family owns the hospital." Yi Qianqian clicked her tongue and shook her head. "Why is it that every time you take leave from work, you act as if nothing has happened? Aren't you being too arrogant? My father is a good friend of the hospital director." Shinjulia appeared a little embarrassed and coughed lightly. "Isn't my brother involved in medical research? He's been working with the hospital director for quite some time." Oh, Yi Qianqian understood. "So it's because of connections." When Shinjulia heard that, he snorted and said, "I'm capable, all right? Otherwise, why do you think the dean wanted me to go back? I've always been comfortable in Kingstown." Hey, so it was the director who asked you to go back? Yi Qianqian seemed very surprised. Still pretending? See how I'll deal with you. Ah, don't scratch me, it's itchy, ha ha ha. The 5th day of the 3rd month was a great day. The weather was fine and sunny, and the wind was gentle and the sun bright. The imperial capital had been frozen for more than half a year. Today was the most comfortable day ever since the warming stopped. Everyone in the Shun family was busy receiving guests and preparing for the wedding. Because old Mrs. Shun was more traditional, Yi Qianqian didn't even order a wedding dress. She just wore the phoenix coronet and wedding gown that old Mrs. Shun had custom-made long ago and waited in the room. In the past, Yi Qianqian had always thought that a Chinese-style wedding was beautiful. But when she changed into the gown, she felt like she was about to collapse. Chapter 1980. Wow, you look so good. The makeup artist who was helping Yi Qianqian with her makeup was all smiles. After fixing her phoenix coronet, she began to work on Yi Qianqian's long red gown. Layer after layer, from the underwear to the underwear to the outerwear, she was wrapped in layers. It was extremely troublesome. Yi Qianqian had a naughty thought. Would Chen Zhilia break down when he undressed her tonight? Or should I just leave it at that? Since I won't be wearing it in the future, I'll just tear it off. The makeup artist glanced at the strange smile on her face and said, "What are you thinking about? A bride should pay attention to her image." Ahem. Yi Qianqian blushed. Soon the makeup artist was done. She stood in the distance and exclaimed, "You look so good. You're so beautiful. Come, let me take a picture." She picked up her phone and snapped a few pictures. She sent a copy to Yi Qianqian and immediately shared it on her WeChat moments. Many people from the bridesmaids and sisters came. There were colleagues, sisters, and classmates. There was also the artist, whom she was on good terms with. The makeup artist led Yi Qianqian to the bridal room. The group of people inside burst into an uproar. "You look so good. I thought the dress that the old lady chose for you would be old-fashioned. I didn't expect it to be so beautiful. It's stunning. But is your hair made of gold? Is it heavy?" When the last question was asked, the people around her laughed at her misfortune. Yi Qianqian's neck was sore. When she heard that, she gritted her teeth and said, "Shut up." Because the two residences were too far apart, Yi Qianqian was in another house. Yi Zhenhua was inside. When he heard the commotion, he walked in and asked with a smile, "What's the matter?" As soon as he entered, he saw Yi Qianqian's appearance. His eyes were filled with amazement. He walked over and said, "Qianqian? I almost couldn't recognize you." Yi Qianqian pouted and said, "I've always been pretty. How could I not recognize you?" Yi Yiyu was beside her. When she heard that, she nudged her and said, "Come on. Just a compliment, and you're acting all high and mighty? That's right. Don't you have any shame?" "Humph, seeing that you're getting married today, I won't argue with you. I'll let you be happy for one day." Yi Qianqian pretended not to hear or see anything and sat quietly on the bed. "Come on, put on your jewelry." Feng Tongtong brought over a tray filled with glittering gold ornaments. Wow. The crowd was in an uproar. Tycoon. This is too scary. 2 for 6 8. 18 golden bracelets. Puff. When Yi Qianqian saw it, she felt goosebumps all over her body. "Don't tell me I have to wear every single one of them?" "Of course," Yi Zhenhua said matter-of-factly. "How could I not wear it? Why would I buy it? Come on, put it on her." The crowd was filled with gloating gazes. Apart from that, there was also some envy. Yi Qianqian wanted to cry, but no tears came out. She resigned herself to her fate as one bracelet after another was put on her. Apart from the bracelets, there were also a few strange-looking gold necklaces hanging around his neck. What? Why don't people wear so many things when they get married? Yi Qianqian was on the verge of breaking down. "It's so heavy. Go away, go away, go away." Yi Zhenhua's face was full of reproach. "We're getting married. What are you talking about? Don't jinx it." Yi Qianqian blinked and looked aggrieved. "It's so heavy." Chapter 1981. That means you're important, Yi Zhenhua said with a gratified expression. Only when you're important will others cherish you. It's a good omen. Other Western-style weddings didn't need to be so complicated. Yi Qianqian grumbled in her heart, but she didn't say a word. Not long after, someone came forward and said, "The groom is here, everyone get ready." Yi Qianqian was about to faint from the pressure. When she heard that, she immediately thought, "I'm going to be liberated." However, she was obviously too naive. Shinjilia was blocked outside the door. It was noisy, and Yi Qianqian's mind was blank. He knelt down on one knee and looked at her as he said, "Qianqian, I'll take you home." The crowd jeered again. Yi Qianqian was a little confused. Numbly, he was brought to the car and then performed the wedding ceremony. He thought that since it was a new era, there wouldn't be so many twists and turns. However, she was wrong. He was so wrong. Not only did they bow to the heaven and earth, but they also crossed the brazier. When Yi Qianqian stepped over, she felt her crotch warm. It almost burned. Then he saw the Shen family. Yi Qianqian's head was covered with a veil, and she was led along the way. An old voice sang the vows and finally, the ceremony of marriage. First bow to heaven and earth. Second bow to your parents. Bow to each other. Yi Qianqian felt as if she were in a television drama, but that was the truth. She felt like she had experienced a wedding that only existed during the Qing dynasty. This feeling was really inhuman. Yi Qianqian's jewelry alone weighed at least a dozen kilograms. It looked respectable, but behind this respectable, the one suffering was the bride. Some of the elders said something, but Yi Qianqian couldn't hear it clearly. But in the end the old voice asked, "Do you remember?" When Yi Qianqian heard Shinjilia speak up, she quickly replied, "I'll remember it." Someone seemed to be laughing beside her. Soon, the old lady who had asked the question walked over and held Yi Qianqian's hand. She said, "You're a good child. You must listen to your grandmother and be filial to your parents-in-law in the future. Do you understand?" There was a faint fragrance on the old man's body. It was very familiar. Yi Qianqian thought for a moment before she remembered. This seemed to be the smell of that old Madame Dongfang. She was a good friend of old Mrs. Shun. "Yeah, thank you, Grandma Dongfang," Yi Qianqian replied. When old Madame Dongfang heard this, she smiled in satisfaction and said, "What a clever child." As soon as he finished speaking, he shouted, "Send her to the bridal chamber." When the joyous music started playing, Yi Qianqian felt like she was dreaming. Later, she found out that old Madame Dongfang's ancestors were all members of the royal family. In terms of bloodline, she was a legitimate descendant of Gij. Deep in their bones and thoughts, they were all proper traditions. After the decline of the Qing dynasty, this ideological tradition was preserved. Old Mrs. Shun had always been on good terms with her, so she had given her full authority to host this important wedding. It was decent, but Yi Qianqian didn't feel good about it. When she was sent back to her room, Yi Qianqian felt as if her neck was about to snap. Just as he was about to lift the veil, an old hand stopped him. Yi Qianqian was shocked. She had always thought that it was her friend who helped her in. She didn't expect it to be an old man. Who was it? Chapter 1982. As for the repeated chapters, it's because of the previous crackdown on pornography. I've edited the previous chapters and released them again. This will show that it's been updated, but in reality, it's just replacing the previous chapters. It's free to click on the chapters that everyone has already read. Chapter 1983. Yi Qianqian's heart raced. Her arms stiffened, and her body stiffened. Who are you? Yi Qianqian was certain that this wasn't Grandma Dongfang or Shinjilia's grandmother. The old woman smiled and replied, "I'm your Grandma Cheng. It's okay if you don't know me. I'll get your grandmother to introduce me to you tomorrow." Yi Qianqian breathed a sigh of relief. She was about to nod her head, but the weight on her neck made her give up on the idea. "All right. Thank you, Grandma Cheng. Why isn't your husband here yet? He must be exhausted." Grandma Cheng's voice was warm. but there was a hint of heartache in it. Yi Qianqian felt wronged, but her rationality made her stronger. She replied, "It's just a little heavy. Everything else is fine." Grandma Cheng laughed and said, "In the past it was always like this when people got married. We even saved a lot of steps. In the past, we had to wake up before 4 o'clock. The number of times we combed our hair, the amount of makeup we applied, the jewelry we wore, and the style we wore were all very particular. We even had to whisper to our mother at the bedside and cry our wedding. These things were all very particular in the past, but in today's society, there's a lot more freedom." Yi Qianqian clicked her tongue when she heard that and asked, "Did Grandma Cheng have a Chinese-style wedding when she got married in the past?" "We didn't have that kind of style back then. We had just been liberated, and we were poor everywhere. We didn't have the money to hold such a wedding." As soon as Grandma Cheng finished speaking, the sound of the door opening came from the other side. Familiar footsteps sounded, and Yi Qianqian immediately felt the urge to cry. It's here, it's finally here." Xinjulia's face was flushed. He had just been forced to drink a lot of wine. When he walked in, he felt like he was floating. When he saw Grandma Cheng, he greeted, "Hello, Grandma." "Yeah, good." Grandma Cheng patted him on the shoulder and said, "Your wife has been waiting anxiously. Hurry up and go." Xinjulia chuckled and said, "Thank you, Grandma." Grandma Cheng took his hand and said, "Come, lift your wife's veil." "With my hands?" "Of course not." Grandma Cheng took a stick from the side and said, "Here." Xinjulia looked at it and reached out to lift the stick. The red veil was lifted. Yi Qianqian wasn't sure if it was real or not. She only felt that her neck was much more relaxed. She looked up at Xinjulia with an aggrieved expression and said, "Hubby, my neck hurts." "Hubby." Those two words tickled Xinjulia's heart. He stepped forward and removed the golden phoenix coronet from her head. Yi Qianqian finally felt liberated. She stretched her neck and almost screamed in pleasure. When Grandma Cheng saw this, she walked out and closed the door. Yi Qianqian glanced behind her. Before she could see if Grandma Cheng had left, Xinjulia stood in front of her. Xinjulia's beautiful, clear amber eyes were filled with astonishment. He held Yi Qianqian's hand with both hands and whispered, "You look so beautiful today." When Yi Qianqian heard that, the corners of her lips unconsciously curled up. She was a little smug, but also a little indignant. She asked, "Am I not usually pretty?" "You look the prettiest today." Xinjulia reached out and helped her remove the necklace from her neck. The man weighed it in his hand and secretly exclaimed, "It's really heavy. You only wore it for a day?" "Weibo, Uncle Wan Lily." Chapter 1984. At the mention of that, Yi Qianqian felt even more aggrieved. She said, "Yeah, you have no idea how uncomfortable it was for me to be piled up with this pile of gold. It's so heavy." He wanted to say that it was too heavy, but then she remembered that today was a joyous day, and she couldn't just die like that. The words that were about to come out of her mouth immediately changed, and she said in a sweet voice, "I've been reborn." Xinjulia didn't know how to react for a moment. Then he burst out laughing. Yi Qianqian reached out and poked his chest. "You're still laughing? It's not easy to marry you. Look at my sister. She has so many things to deal with." Xinjulia held her hand, and his breathing quickened. However, his other hand was not idle. He untied the rings of the necklace around her neck. There were a total of 3 necklaces, one thicker than the other. Next were all kinds of bracelets, and bracelets. Xinjulia removed them one by one, and placed them on the bedside table. There were more than 10 or 20 of them. Xinjulia felt sorry for her, but at the same time, he found it funny. Finally, after putting everything away, he said, "Thank you for your hard work." All the weight on Yi Qianqian's body was lifted. She lay down on the bed and said, "I'm so tired." "Yeah." Xinjulia leaned forward and unbuttoned her dress. "Just this once. When we get to Yun Town, we'll wear a wedding dress. I'm not walking anymore. I'm so tired." Yi Qianqian allowed him to do whatever he wanted. Suddenly, she recalled the idea she had that morning. She smiled and said, "Hubby, guess how many clothes I'm wearing?" I can't guess, Shinjulia said as he unbuttoned her shirt. Let's try it on and you'll know. That was exactly what Yi Qianqian was thinking. She ignored him and narrowed her eyes. But after a while he fell asleep in a daze. As she fell asleep, she felt as if she was about to fly. Then she felt a chill run down her spine. His face and neck felt itchy and warm at the same time. She tilted her head, but her lips were firmly captured by his. When she opened her eyes, Shinjulia's face was right in front of hers. He smiled softly and said in a low voice, 8. Before she could react, he suddenly lifted her leg. His clothes were still intact. Yi Qianqian perked up and asked, What are you doing? Wedding night. Shinjulia's cheeks were still a little red, and he looked at her with a smile. What do you think I want to do? Oh, Yi Qianqian covered her face. You just kissed my face. I have makeup on. Don't. When Shinjulia heard that, he quickly put her down and said, Come on, remove your makeup before you sleep. I'm so sleepy, help me. Why are you so lazy? Shinjulia pinched her nose and walked over to the vanity. Which one is for removing makeup? Shinjulia rummaged through the dressing table. Yi Qianqian got up on her own and pulled on an inner garment. All the other clothes on her body had been stripped off, and she was only wearing this one, revealing half of her body. Shinjulia's eyes burned with passion. Yi Qianqian didn't realize it at all. After removing her makeup, she went to the bathroom to wash her face. But halfway through, with bubbles still on her face, the man hugged her from behind. Let me help you. Shinjulia scooped up some water and wiped it on her face. Not only did he not wash her face clean, but he also wet her clothes. Yi Qianqian was annoyed. She turned around and was about to say something, but her lips were pressed against his. Chapter 1985. Yi Qianqian struggled a little, but there was no doubt that it was of no use at all. Therefore, a certain someone pounced on her without hesitation. Well, after all, the atmosphere of the wedding night was exactly what they wanted. Yi Qianqian thought about it, and let him do as he pleased. However, the price she paid was a little heavy. After a carefree night, Yi Qianqian's body, which was about to fall apart from exhaustion, was tormented even more. The next day, Yi Qianqian didn't even want to open her eyes. However, Shinjulia still woke her up and said, Wake up. Grandma and Mom and Dad are waiting for us to serve them tea. Yi Qianqian felt uncomfortable all over. She whimpered and didn't want to move at all. Shinjulia tugged at her. Yi Qianqian reached out and patted his body lazily. She was weak. Come, I'll help you brush your teeth. I'll sleep a little longer. 10 minutes. Yi Qianqian closed her eyes and lay on the pillow, pulling the blanket over her head. Shinjulia, who was standing by the side, asked, What if Grandma gets mad later? Yi Qianqian was speechless. Wife. Yi Qianqian was speechless. Hey Grandma, why are you here? When she heard that, Yi Qianqian immediately covered her body and looked up. But where was Grandma? Shinjulia saw that and chuckled. He pulled her up and said, All right, come back and continue sleeping after the tea. Yi Qianqian still felt weak when she heard that. She looked at the time. It was only 6 o'clock. She raised her hand lazily and said, Carry me. Shinjulia carried her to the bathroom and squeezed some toothpaste for her. Yi Qianqian chased him out and locked the door from the inside before slowly locking it. After taking a shower, he walked out of the bathroom. When she came out, she found that her face looked as if it had been squeezed dry. Yi Qianqian put on a towel and walked out. Her body was still sore. Shinjulia was lying on the bed and almost fell asleep. When he saw her walking over, he immediately got up and rummaged through her clothes. He found a red cheongsam. The cheongsam was very exquisite. It was a spring dress. After putting it on Yi Qianqian, it looked delicate and exquisite. Shinjulia couldn't help but plant a kiss on her lips. My wife is so beautiful. Yi Qianqian pouted and said, Let's go. Comb your hair and blow dry it. Shinjulia had no choice but to take a towel to dry her hair. You look terrible. Let's wait until you look better before we go out. Okay. Yi Qianqian let him play with her and almost fell asleep again. Her body was aching. When the sound of the hairdryer stopped, she immediately straightened up. After applying a little makeup cream on her face, her complexion finally looked better. Outside, Nanny he had already prepared the tea. When he saw them coming out, he brought the tray over. Yi Qianqian had never eaten pork before, but she had at least seen a pig run. Chapter 1986. She hugged the door tightly and looked at Shinjilia for help. Hubby, didn't you say? Shinjilia didn't expect things to turn out this way. He cleared his throat and said, well, she should be back soon, right? When Shinjilia said this, he felt guilty. She glanced at old Mrs. Shun with a questioning look. Old Mrs. Shun glanced at it and said, we still have to go to Dongfang for lunch. We'll be back in the afternoon. Yi Qianqian felt like she was about to faint. She was really, really sleepy. Shinjilia's heart ached for her and he said, Grandma, why don't we do it another day? Qianqian must be exhausted from the past few days. How can that be? I've already told my old sisters that it can't be changed. Old Mrs. Shun looked displeased and said, who told you not to worry about your wife? It's fine, Qianqian. We'll be back in the afternoon. Oh, be a good girl and follow Grandma. Yi Qianqian felt that she was about to be abducted and sold. When she saw how happy her grandmother was, she compromised and said, all right, let's go. Old Mrs. Shun immediately beamed. He grabbed Yi Qianqian's hand and quickly left. After the ordeal, Yi Qianqian felt as if she had seen a ghost. She felt much better. After dinner, she returned home. Shinjilia wasn't home. Shin Luo and was sitting on the sofa with the baby in his arms, coaxing him. It was rare for Yi Qianqian to see such a young child. She went forward and called out, Big brother, is the baby asleep? Shin Luo didn't raise his head. He replied in a low voice, no. Do you want a hug? All Yi Qianqian wanted to do was hug the baby and bask in the happy atmosphere. When she heard that, she reached out her hands. Shin Luo didn't look up. He reached out and handed the baby to her. She didn't know why, even though she hadn't seen his face. She felt that this man seemed a little sad. He couldn't help but take a few more glances. However, Shin Luo seemed to be prepared. He quickly got up and turned to leave. Yi Qianqian watched his back as he entered the public bathroom. Soon she heard the sound of the door closing. Her voice wasn't loud, but at that moment, Yi Qianqian's heart felt empty. The baby was very obedient. At that moment, he was looking at Yi Qianqian with a pair of round eyes. He opened his mouth slightly and stuck out his tongue. Yi Qianqian couldn't help but smile. She hugged him and sat down. Nanny he had just returned from watering the plants. When she saw Yi Qianqian carrying the baby, she couldn't help but ask, where's Master? Where's the bathroom? Oh, Nanny he put down the watering can and wiped her hands on her apron. She walked up to her and said, second young mistress, eldest young master doesn't look very happy. I think he misses his mother. If you have nothing better to do, try to comfort him. The child's mother was Shin Manting. Was Shin Manting really dead? Yi Qianqian couldn't believe it. But if Shin Manting wasn't dead, where was she? While he was deep in thought, he heard the bathroom door open. Shin Luo seemed to have just washed his face. He walked over and said, give it to me. Go rest for a while. Look at your face. Yi Qianqian subconsciously touched her face and looked into his eyes. Shin Luo quickly looked away and said, Jilia went out with Luo Ran. He asked you to rest when you came back. You don't have to look for him. Chapter 1987. Shin Luo responded in a low voice and carried the child back to his room. Yi Qianqian returned to her room. She had thought that she would lie down and immediately fall asleep. But unexpectedly, she was very energetic. Her mind was full of thoughts. And her mind was full of Shin Manting and Shin Luo. Shin Jilia said that she was dead, but Shin Luo looked sad sometimes. But he didn't mourn the death of his wife. Although it was a little wicked to think that way, no matter how she looked at it, it was impossible for Shin Manting to die. After thinking about it again and again, she picked up her phone. Of course, she couldn't have Shin Manting's WeChat. But there was someone who definitely had it. Sisai. You are you there? You seem to be very free and immediately replied. Yes. Sisai. Do you have Shin Manting's WeChat? No. With our previous relationship, do you think we would have each other's WeChat? When Yi Qianqian saw this, she actually felt that it was very reasonable. Sisai. Do you know who has it? Shin Jilia, Shin Luo, and your parents-in-law. Yi Qianqian straightened up and immediately called Shin Jilia. Shin Jilia was bragging to a group of friends, showing off the wedding ring and the superiority of a groom. At that moment, when he saw that his wife was calling, he proudly picked up the phone, waved it, and said, "Hey, my wife is calling. She's so clingy. I can't help it." The group of guys immediately sighed and waved their hands disdainfully. Shin Jilia helplessly shook his head and sighed. You are all jealous of me. Don't you know that jealousy makes people ugly? You guys are very ugly. Then he immediately picked up the phone and said, Honey, what's wrong? Do you have Shin Manting's WeChat? Yi Qianqian went straight to the point. When Shin Jilia heard that, he was silent for a moment before saying, Why did you suddenly think of her? You told Big Brother that she was dead, but from his reaction, it doesn't seem like Shin Manting is dead. I want to try looking for her. Shin Jilia frowned and asked, Honey, what are you trying to do? I think Big Brother has been in a bad mood recently. He's in a daze every day and looks very sad. Moreover, the baby needs his mother. If Shin Manting is not dead, let's find her and bring her back. The baby needs a complete family. That's right, Shin Manting said. Shin Jilia's expression darkened. After some thought he said, All right, I'll take a look. Then, he hung up the phone and scrolled through his WeChat contact list. Luo ran and the others looked over and asked, What's wrong? It's nothing. I have something to do. I'll be leaving first. You guys enjoy yourselves. Io, his buddies jeered. It's so different after getting married. One phone call from your wife and you have to rush back. Poor single dogs like us. Shin Jilia was even more pleased with himself and said, Just you wait, you ugly fellows. As he spoke, he had already picked up his car keys and walked out. He scrolled through and confirmed that Shin Manting's WeChat contact was indeed there. However, when he tried to send a message, the other party rejected it. Clearly, he had been blacklisted. He opened his WeChat moments, but it was also blank. When he got home, Shin Jilia went into his room. Chapter 1988. What a heartless woman. However, Yi Qianqian's words reminded him of something. Shin Luo, and had always referred to Shin Manting as dead. However, it didn't make sense that he didn't even mention a word about her funeral. Well, he had been negligent. He had been busy with the wedding and hadn't paid attention to this kind of thing. Now that he thought about it carefully, he found that there were loopholes everywhere. He picked up Yi Qianqian's phone and searched for Shin Manting's WeChat number. He soon found it. Nickname, Mopey Loving Heart. He sent a friend request, but there was no response for a long time. Would Shin Manting be looking for a job at this time? After all, people had to eat. After thinking about it, Shin Jilia sent another friend request. Hello, I saw your resume on the internet. However, he couldn't type any more words. He sent it over, but there was still no response. He wasn't surprised, but he was still a little disappointed. Shin Jilia put the phone back. He was also exhausted. He went to the bathroom to wash up, and went to bed with her. However, when he was about to fall asleep, he heard Yi Qianqian's phone ring. He suddenly got up and took her phone. He unlocked it, but found it was only a Weibo gossip notification. He was disappointed again. Suddenly, there was a soft sound. On the top of the notification bar, the big words were clear. Mopey accepted your friend request. Shin Jilia was shocked and immediately opened it. However, before he could send anything, it showed that the other party was typing. Mopey Heart. Hello, I'm Shin Manting. May I know which company you are from? Oh my god. Shin Jilia didn't know how to react for a moment. It turned out to be really Shin Manting? Sitting on the bed, Shin Jilia had a strong urge to shake Yi Qianqian awake. However, His reason prevailed over his impulse. Shen Jilya specially clicked on Yi Qianqian's WeChat moments to take a look. The latest post was of her taking a picture of the wedding scene with a crying emoji. Getting married is so tiring. I'm going to draw a manga in the future. The name will be, What's the Experience of Marrying into a Traditional Family? It'll definitely be popular. Fire. Shen Jilya was shocked when he saw it. As expected, this post was blocked from many people. This guy. Shen Jilya smiled and scrolled down. There didn't seem to be any information that exposed her husband or family. Heaving a sigh of relief, he set his WeChat moments to display only 3 days, then replied, Hello, I'm an editor of the Eurasian Comics Imperial Capital branch. I'm in charge of recruitment. After looking at your resume, I feel that you're very suitable for our job requirements. Shen Manting, who was far away in Jiangnan, was shocked to hear such a rigid reply. Eurasian Comics? This was Oming's company. Yu Lily used to work there, and she often dropped by. However, a branch company in the imperial capital. A branch office in the imperial capital? Subconsciously, he glanced at his profile picture. It was blank, followed by a chinchilla's butt. He clicked on this person's WeChat moments. He seemed to have gotten married recently. The other posts were all about work and promoting the comic. It should be true. Shen Manting confirmed it and asked, Are you from the capital? Which website did you see it on? Just as he was at his wit's end, Yi Qianqian opened her eyes. Chapter 1989. Shen Jilya's eyes immediately lit up when he saw Yi Qianqian. He said, My dear wife, you're here just in time. You're here to save the day. Reply to Sister Manting. Sister Manting? Yi Qianqian immediately perked up. Shen Manting? Yeah. Shen Jilya nodded. I can't reveal my identity. If I do, she might blacklist us. So, I pretended to be from Eurasian Comics. What do you mean by pretending? Yi Qianqian took the phone. I'm from Eurasian Comics. Yi Qianqian looked at the chat history and replied, I saw your email in my mailbox. Didn't you send it yourself? Mopey heart. Well, I sent it in one go. I didn't check the company. Sisai. Oh, Sisai. Miss Shen, have you never worked before? Mopey heart. Yes, but I've never been in the field of comics. Sisai. You don't need to have any experience in comics. We're mainly looking for talents in the marketing department. You must be able to work hard. Your resume looks good. If you're interested, you're welcome to come for an interview. Mopey heart. I'm not in the capital. Does that mean you're not coming back? Yi Qianqian was a little surprised. She was about to reply when Shen Jilya stopped her. What are you trying to say? Shen Jilya asked. Ask her to come back. Yi Qianqian said matter-of-factly. Come to the capital. Why do you want to? If you insist, people will think you're a multi-level marketer with bad intentions. I'll do it. As he spoke, Shen Jilya had already taken the phone from her. Sisai, it's okay. Think about it. Yi Qianqian panicked when she saw that and said, If you say that, people will come back. I didn't want to come back. If she doesn't come back later, it's all your fault. What's the rush? Mopey heart. Okay, thank you. Sisai. 5 days off and 2 days off. The base salary is 5,000, and there will be a commission. The marketing department has a hard time. You may have to work overtime. The overtime pay is $20 an hour. Yi Qianqian was stunned. For a newcomer, isn't this too much? No. Shen Jilya's expression was natural. She must have found quite a number of jobs. The salary isn't low, but it's not excessive either. Mopey heart. Okay, thank you. Sisai. There's a staff dormitory and a 3-month trial period. After that, you'll be able to purchase 5 insurances and 1 housing fund. The benefits are quite good, and you'll be able to enjoy all kinds of holidays. If you want to come, you can come and see. Where are you now? Mopey love. Jiangsu. Sisai, alright. I hope you can consider it. We are eager for talents to join us. Shake hands. Hey, what a straight and official tone. One look and you can tell that it's a man speaking. Yi Qianqian said with a look of disdain. I'm a man to begin with. Besides, isn't that what recruitment is all about? It's fast and accurate. Shinjulia looked at her. The conditions are tempting. It's just a matter of whether she's willing to come. Yi Qianqian had a bad feeling about this. Why didn't you tell the truth? Why would we lie to her? I think that even if we trick her here, she will definitely hate us when she finds out that it's not true. Shin Manting disguised herself and sat on a bench in the park with her phone in her hand. She wanted to send a message to Shen Luo, but she felt that it was inappropriate. She didn't want to be with Shen Luo, so she gave up on the child. However, blood was thicker than water. That kinship was not something she could give up just because she wanted to. During this period of time, all she could think about was Little Moon. Even in her dreams she missed him. However, he couldn't bring himself to do so. Shin Manting hesitated for a long time before she switched off the screen. However, the phone vibrated slightly. Shin Manting picked up the phone and took a closer look. It was Shen Luoan. Shin Luoan, it's you? Shin Manting was stunned. And then she was shocked again. Chapter 1991. Shin Manting's heart raced when she saw the words that popped up on her phone. Almost reflexively, he looked around. Soon, she saw a figure coming up from behind. The figure was tall, but much thinner than the last time she saw him. He had lost weight. He was obviously thinner. Shin Manting's heart ached slightly, but she reacted quickly and immediately got up. She subconsciously wanted to leave. However, Shen Luo quickly stepped forward and chased after her. Shin Manting ran faster when she heard the movement behind her, but there was still a huge gap in strength. Shin Luo caught up with her in a short while and grabbed her hand. Shin Manting was shocked and immediately flung her hand away as if she had been electrocuted. However, her hand was held tightly and didn't move at all. Why are you here? Shin Luo looked at her and frowned. I told you, it's useless for you to regret it. Why did you come here and leave as soon as you saw me? Why? What could she do? Shin Manting looked at Shin Luo and then opened her mouth. She wanted to speak, but she didn't know what to say. She wanted to see her child. She wanted to see her baby. That seemed to be the right thing to do. But Shin Manting didn't dare to say it. Shin Manting pulled her hand away and lowered her head. I just passed by and thought of sitting here. Passing by? Shin Luo was amused. The capital is so big. Why don't you pass by in the 5th or 4th ring? Can you afford to live in a house here in your current situation? Don't you think you're deliberately extending yourself here? Shin Luo's words were sharp. Shin Manting only felt a burst of pain in her heart, and her eyes were a little sore. She pulled her hand back and said in a low voice, It's none of your business. It's not like you own this place. Did I offend you by sitting here? Shin Luo was speechless for a moment. Indeed, it didn't bother him. But as soon as he saw her, he couldn't control himself. God knew that when he saw her just now, Shin Luo felt that his heart was about to jump out. After staring at her for a while, he finally mustered up the courage to send a message to confirm. After seeing her pick up her phone, he came forward. He was afraid that he would be scolded as a psychopath, like the previous few times. Do you want to see the child? Shin Luo asked. Yes. He was thinking like a madman. Shin Manting's heart skipped a beat, and she looked up at him. However, he didn't dare to say a word. He had said not to regret it. She now regretted it. Shin Luo was right in front of her. Shin Manting could imagine that there would be a round of humiliation. The baby is fine, Shin Luo interrupted her. He's growing more and more adorable. He's eating well and sleeping well. He's spending more and more time awake. Don't worry, I'll take good care of him. This string of words was spoken in a calm voice. It was just a statement. Chapter 1992. Shin Manting struggled in silence for a long time before she found her voice. Her heart ached and she said with difficulty, I want to see the baby. Shen Luo's back was facing her. When he heard this, he inexplicably breathed a sigh of relief. He straightened his body slightly and then turned sideways. He saw Shen Manting's blushing face and seemed to be ashamed. He felt a little complicated, but his face was serious. He stared at her and said slowly, "I said that as long as you don't go back that day, the child will have nothing to do with you in the future. That's not up to you." Shen Manting looked up and clenched her fists slightly. "I gave birth to the baby. I won't abandon him. But you didn't come back that day." Shen Luo faced her with a somewhat sarcastic smile on his face. "I begged you so much, but you still refused to come back. Now you have the cheek to say that you want this child?" Shen Manting frowned and looked up. "You. A man's words carry weight." Shen Luo looked at her. "Unlike you women, who only know how to move your lips. As for the rest, haha." He looked up and down at Shen Manting with disdain. "You can't do anything." "I didn't say that I don't want this child." Shen Manting's face was full of anger. "You have acquiesced. Now the child is in my hands, and I have the chat records here. Even if you go to the court will only award the child to me. Then I also have custody." "You don't." Shen Luo replied coldly and glanced at her. "Don't you feel ashamed when you say that?" Shen Luo Shen Manting lowered her head slightly and said in a choked voice, "I didn't come back to quarrel with you. Now I want to see the child, just one look." "One look. I can show you the photo," Shen Luo said and actually picked up the phone. Shen Manting subconsciously looked at it with desire in her eyes. He had a photo but she didn't even have a photo. Shen Luo had been watching her. He looked through it and then handed the phone to her. Shen Manting subconsciously wanted to take it, but Shen Luo didn't let go. "Give it to me," Shen Manting said anxiously. "Let me see. This is a cell phone. It's a valuable item. What if you take it away?" Shen Luo's voice was calm, but his words were extremely insulting. Shen Manting was so angry that her neck and eyes turned red. "You're such a despicable person. Even if I were poor, I wouldn't steal your cell phone." Shen Luo didn't continue the conversation. He raised his eyelids, held the phone in his hand, and said, "Do you want to see it?" Shen Manting resisted the urge to look at him. It was Little Moon. There were only a few wrinkled and red photos on her phone, but the video on Shen Luo's phone showed that the baby had grown up a lot. Her little face was white and tender, becoming very smooth. In the video on the phone, the baby's mouth was slightly open, and he was sucking on his little finger. Saliva was dripping from the corner of his mouth. "Oh my, it's dirty." Mrs. Shen's voice. Shen Manting's vision blurred when she heard this voice after a long time. He rubbed his eyes and stared at her. The baby's finger was pulled out, bringing along a silver thread. His little tongue moved, and then his little face wrinkled. He was about to cry. Soon he was carried up, and Mrs. Shen's figure appeared in the mirror. Chapter 1993. Although Mrs. Shen said so, she didn't step aside. She picked up the bottle that had been prepared beside her, tested the temperature, and stuffed it into the baby's mouth. The baby looked like he was about to cry, but he was gone in an instant. He sucked on the bottle, clenched his fists, held the bottle and sucked in big mouthfuls. Mrs. Shen held Little Moon in her arms, and there was a happy smile on her face. What a happy family. Shen Manting felt very complicated. Looking at the baby in the video, her desire to get close to him and hug him grew stronger. "Are you done?" Shen Luo put the phone away. Shen Manting was anxious and reached out to grab it. However, she grabbed Shen Luo's other hand. He put his hand in front of her and looked at her indifferently. Shen Manting's heart skipped a beat, and she withdrew her hand guiltily. "Leave if you're done," Shen Luo said rudely and kicked the phone back into his pocket. "I have to go home to see my son." His words were very tempting to Shen Manting. She also wanted to see the baby, and she also wanted to see Little Moon. But how could she say it? Shen Manting's lips moved, but she still didn't say a word. Shen Luo glanced at her, then turned around and walked away. He didn't hesitate, and he didn't stop. Shen Manting watched as he walked further and further away, and her heart became more and more empty. Shin Manting followed him silently, and she crossed her arms and looked at his back. Shin Luo and seemed to notice it, and he suddenly stopped in his tracks. Shin Manting didn't avoid him. She walked forward, lowered her head slightly and said, Shin Luoan, I want to see him. Haven't you finished watching? Shin Luoan didn't turn around, and his back was facing her. What else do you want? You know that I don't just want to watch the video. Shin Manting bit her lower lip, and her voice gradually trembled and choked with sobs. I haven't seen him for a long time. Shin Luoan pulled a long face. You asked for it. With that he sneered, and then walked forward quickly. His pace was more than twice as fast as before. Shin Manting knew that she was in the wrong, but the desire to see the baby in her heart grew stronger. She looked at him and followed silently. Hey. A neighbor was surprised to see Shin Manting. Manting, you're back. Shin Manting's face stiffened, and she stopped moving. Shin Luo, and kept walking in the direction of his house. For some reason, Shin Manting felt a chill run down her spine when she looked at her neighbor. He didn't chase her away, but Shin Manting's footsteps seemed to be frozen at this moment. His figure went further and further away, and soon he disappeared. The neighbor looked at Shin Manting, then at Shin Luo, and asked, did they quarrel? When he took a closer look he exclaimed, Io, why does your complexion look so bad? You've lost so much weight. You used to be chubby. Shin Manting felt her entire body stiffen. She quickly turned around and said, You've got the wrong person. Then he quickly walked back. His footsteps were getting faster and faster, faster and faster, and finally he was running. Her heart was beating fast, and she was gasping for breath. Tears were already streaming down her cheeks. He calmed himself down, wiped his eyes, and immediately took the subway back. Shin Luoan didn't look back as he walked. He didn't know when Shin Manting had stopped following him. Chapter 1994. He didn't know why, but he suddenly couldn't hold his breath any longer. Standing at his door, Shin Luo, and sat down on the steps. The wind blew gently, and the flowers in the courtyard swayed. Spring was here. The surroundings were filled with lush greenery. The flowers that should have bloomed had all bloomed. Those who were supposed to be defeated had been defeated. He didn't know how long he had been sitting on the steps, watching the sun get smaller and smaller. He actually felt a little like a lunatic. Heh. Shin Luoan stood up, patted the dust, and muttered to himself. Isn't that a lunatic? He turned around and entered the house. As soon as he entered, he heard Little Moon crying loudly. Seeing Shin Luoan return, Nanny He, who was at her wit's end, finally breathed a sigh of relief and said, Come and hug your son. He's crying so hard that he didn't pee or defecate. He won't even drink milk. I don't know what's wrong with him. Shin Luoan took it and stared at the baby for a long time. He slowly said, He probably misses Mom. Stop it. Nanny He rebuked. He doesn't even know who Mom is. How can he miss Mom? Please don't catch a cold. When Madam comes back later, let her take a look at him. But it was amazing. After Shin Luo and hugged the baby for a while, Little Moon's crying gradually subsided, and he started to hiccup. Nanny He teased, I don't think he misses Mom. He misses Dad. Little Moon stopped crying and stared at Shin Luo, and with his dark, watery eyes. Are you hungry? Shin Luo, and held the baby with one hand and stood up to get the bottle for him. The milk in the bottle was freshly brewed, so the temperature was just right. He stuffed it into the baby's mouth and he immediately hugged it. Shin Luo, and was usually tired from work and in a bad mood. As long as he came home and saw the baby and hugged him, he would naturally relax. But today he couldn't relax no matter what. After coaxing the baby to sleep, Shin Luo, and sat on the bed in a daze. After a while he went out. Shin Julia and his wife sat in the living room, snuggling together and looking at their phones. Yi Qianqian occasionally reached out to tap on the screen. When she saw Shin Luoan, she said, Big brother, it's almost time to eat. Okay. Shin Luoan responded and then sat down. He picked up an orange and started to peel it. Shin Julia's eyes were glued to the phone, but he didn't forget to glance up at Shin Julia. Then he quickly put down his phone and said with a serious face, "Brother, I have good news and bad news. Which one do you want to hear first?" "It's bad," Shen Luoan replied. "In that case, I'll tell you the good news first." Yi Qianqian was speechless. Shen Luoan glanced at him. "What?" "I found out that Sister Manting is still alive. I contacted her yesterday and planned to arrange a job for her in the capital. I just didn't have the time to tell you." Shen Julia coughed lightly, looking a little embarrassed. Shen Luoan paused in the act of peeling an orange and looked up at him. "Did you call Shen Manting over?" Yi Qianqian and Shen Julia's eyes widened when they heard Shen Luoan's question. Yi Qianqian asked, "Big brother, do you already know?" "Yeah." Shen Luoan tossed the orange peel away. "I saw it in the park." "Ah." Yi Qianqian was even more shocked. "But wasn't she still in Jiangsu yesterday? She said she would only be back in a few days." Chapter 1995. The bad news is. Shen Luoan hesitated and glanced at Yi Qianqian. Yi Qianqian cleared her throat and said, "It was his idea, not mine." "Hey, you sold your husband so quickly." Shen Julia reached out to hold her in his arms and said, "We asked her to come to the capital and arranged a job for her in marketing or research. But I don't have such a job here. Brother, you." Shen Luoan squeezed the juice out of the orange in his hand. The fragrance of oranges filled the air. Yi Qianqian was envious of the fruits. She picked one up and started to peel it herself. Shen Julia felt a little uncomfortable under her gaze. He coughed lightly and said, "In any case, you can just arrange for one of them. If it doesn't work out, I'll have no choice but to look for Yang Yi." Yang Yi had been one of Shen Julia's brothers for many years. Although their relationship wasn't as close as Luo Rant's, it was still passable. Right now he was running a small logistics company. It wasn't big, but it was pretty decent. Working at Yang Ye's place is actually pretty good. It's just that it's a little tiring. Recently, he often works overtime and doesn't have enough sleep. He's so skinny that he looks like a dried corpse. When Shen Luoan heard this, he couldn't bring himself to eat the orange in his hand. He threw it into the dustbin and said coldly, "Why are you so nosy? What does this have to do with you? Shen Manting is willing to be self-reliant. What's the difference between you and Charity? Do you think she will accept it?" Of course not. The poorer a person was, the more proud they were. He had always thought that he was unyielding and didn't need any external help. Otherwise, it would be considered as charity and food given in destitution. In particular, Shen Manting had some mental problems. Her brain circuitry was not something that normal people like them could understand. When Shen Julia heard Shen Luoan's words, he pursed his lips and said, "That's not true. She has to work too. It's not like she's afraid to do anything and just sit there doing nothing. That's called charity." "Ha!" Shen Luoan stood up and looked at him. "You don't know anything about Shen Manting. If she finds out that you've tricked her into coming here, she'll probably be disgusted by the sight of you, not to mention the job you've introduced her to you." After saying that, he turned around and went into the bathroom. The sound of running water could be heard. Yi Qianqian and Shen Julia looked at each other. Shen Luoan felt extremely irritated. He hadn't seen Shen Manting for a long time, and when he suddenly saw her today, he felt a little sorry for her. Not that he felt sorry for her, but for himself. Pathetic and pitiful. He was clearly a man, but he was so lowly that his mood was controlled by a woman. When she mentioned that she wanted to see the child, he actually thought, "Why don't we just leave it at that? Let her see the child. Maybe after seeing it, she wouldn't bear to leave." However, this thought only lasted for a moment. In the end, this thought was overcome by reason. He was still so calm that he was cruel. "Shen Luoan, you big fool." He washed his face and went out. Dinner was ready. After dinner, Shen Luoan returned to his room. The baby was very obedient, very obedient. He had been sleeping obediently for more than an hour. More than once, he wondered if it was because he knew his mother wasn't by his side that he was so quiet and rarely cried. He picked up his phone and thought for a moment. He typed a line of words in the chat window with Shen Manting. "Let's meet up." However, after thinking about it, he decided to delete it. He threw the phone aside and lay down. I encountered a small unpleasant incident that affected my mood, so it's even later. I'll make 2 updates before 1 o'clock. Chapter 1996. Shen Luoan closed his eyes. Before long, he heard his phone vibrate. Manting. Let's meet. Shen Luoan was stunned for a while when he saw these words. He stared at it for a while and subconsciously wanted to reply. Okay. However, his eyes suddenly moved up and saw a row of messages. Every row was green, and every row was sent out by him. He had sent so many messages, but she hadn't even replied once. Shen Luoan was suddenly angry. He deleted the word and then replied. What's the matter? Shen Manting could almost imagine what kind of expression he had on his face when he said those 3 words. Distant and indifferent. It must be cold. It was the kind of coldness when looking at an enemy. Shen Manting was a little timid. If she asked him to meet, she would have to endure his sarcasm. If she mentioned the baby, would he say, "You didn't want the baby, I gave you a chance?" Then he would dismiss her with one sentence. Shen Manting felt her heart beat heavy and slow. She looked at the 3 words for a long time and then replied, I think we need to talk. Shen Luoan, I have nothing to talk to you about. The baby is mine. Shen Manting's heart trembled, and it was cold. This man was unbelievably heartless. Shen Manting, I gave birth to the baby. Shen Luoan, didn't you say you didn't want it? The expected conversation was neither nutritious nor contentious, but it made Shen Manting stunned for a long time. Shen Manting was overwhelmed with sadness. She sat on the bed in a daze, and her heart sank. Ding dong. It was a WeChat notification. Shen Luoan, if you can't eat, I can treat you to a meal. At 11 o'clock tomorrow, I will take the baby out to bask in the sun. Come over if you want to eat. Shen Manting was delighted and immediately replied, Okay. After a while, Shen Luoan replied, Are you so poor? Has your dignity been eaten by a dog? Shen Manting's heart hurt, and she didn't want to reply. She threw the phone away and went to wash off the dust on her body. The next day, Shen Manting woke up at 7 o'clock. It would take an hour and a half to get there, which meant that she had an hour to tidy up. She took out the dress that she had treasured. The spring weather was just right to wear this long-sleeve dress. However, the dress she was wearing now was obviously a little too big. It looked wide and hung loosely on his body, not very fitting. However, she did not have a better dress. She carefully took out her old cosmetics. Although it had been some time, it shouldn't have expired. This was the first time she dressed up and put on makeup seriously since she left the Shen family. She looked into the mirror and saw another high-spirited Shen Manting. Good, perfect. The child had started to grow up. What if the child remembered her? Even if she couldn't have the baby, she still wanted to leave a good impression on him. She left the house and took the subway. Unlike yesterday, at this moment, many people on the train would look at Shen Manting. After arriving, she carried her bag and walked to the park. 10:50. Today's weather was very good. There were strong old men and women walking, playing ball games, and exercising together. The flowers were red and the grass was green. Shen Manting sat on the same bench as yesterday. She couldn't help but look around for fear that she might miss Shen Luoan. However, after waiting for a full 20 minutes, they finally saw Shen Luoan. Chapter 1997. Shen Manting was slightly taken aback and subconsciously looked behind her. However, it was really only Shen Luoan. Where's the baby? Shen Manting frowned and felt that she had been deceived. Didn't you say that you brought the baby out to bask in the sun? The sun is so hot at this time. Do you want to burn the baby to death? Shen Luoan looked at her coldly and then looked her up and down. You were like a village woman yesterday. Are you planning to sell yourself today? Shen Manting heard this and almost rushed up to strangle him. She gritted her teeth and scolded him angrily. You lied to me, Shen Luoan. Are you still a man? The old people in the park heard her voice and couldn't help but look over. Shen Luoan glanced at her disapprovingly and said, You know better than anyone whether I'm a man or not. His casual words easily stirred up the dark memories hidden in the depths of her mind. Shin Manting's face turned pale, and she turned to leave. Her heart felt as if it had been stabbed by many sharp arrows. It was full of dense bloody holes. Shin Luo and stood in front of her and reached out to grab her bag. He said, "Aren't you going to eat? Let's go. I'll treat you. There's nothing delicious to eat with you." Shin Manting's shoulders were trembling with anger. Her eyes were slightly red and she said angrily, "Seeing you makes me lose my appetite." Shin Luo acted as if he didn't hear her. He grabbed her bag with one hand and grabbed her wrist with the other. He said, "Even if you lose your appetite, you can eat it. I'm already out. I have something to say to you. If you have something to say it now." Shin Luo directly pulled her forward. The old people in the park looked at them and thought that it was a young couple quarreling. They didn't care and turned to continue. Shin Manting's eyes were red and she roared, "Shin Luo, what do you want to eat? No. How about roast duck? No. Let go of me. How about Cantonese cuisine? Hunan cuisine? Sichuan cuisine?" Shin Manting tried to pull her hand back, but it didn't budge. She panted and her breathing became heavy. "I said I don't want to eat with you." Shin Luo's face finally darkened. He tightened his grip on her wrist and said in a low voice, "Then who do you want to eat with? You dressed up like this. You've seduced me in the past. Are you ready to resume your old career? Why are you always so full of yourself? I'm a woman." Shin Manting couldn't take it anymore and yelled. She choked with sobs. "As a woman, can't I dress up a little? This is the first time I've put on makeup and put on a dress in a long time. I just wanted to see my son. I didn't expect you to lie to me." Tears flowed down her cheeks, but her voice was still firm, and she did not let herself cry out loud. After a while, Shin Manting said in a clear voice, "Moreover, even if I do sell it, what does it have to do with you?" Shin Luo looked at her for a while, his expression unreadable. After a long time he said, "I want to take care of your business." Shin Manting's face suddenly turned pale. She struggled for a moment, but Shin Luo quickly changed the topic. "It's good that you're not going to date another man. I originally planned to let you see the child, but if my son's mother is such a piece of trash, then there's no need to see her." Shin Manting grasped the main point and looked at him with hope. "No, I just want to dress up and leave a better impression on my son. Really." Chapter 1998. Shin Luo looked at her and pulled her. Shin Manting didn't move. She took a step forward after being pulled by him. Shin Luo turned around and strode forward, pulling her with him. Shin Manting didn't make a sound and followed him silently. They arrived at a restaurant. Shin Manting used to come here often, and especially liked the food here. It wasn't a fancy restaurant, but Shin Manting hadn't eaten in such an occasion for a long time. She followed Shin Luo and sat down. The waiter quickly brought the menu and waited for them to order. Shin Luo ordered a lot of dishes in one breath. She didn't know whether it was a coincidence or not, but she found that she liked many of them. Shin Luo didn't like spicy food, but she liked it very much. At least half of the dishes he ordered were spicy. Her heart fluttered slightly, and a strange feeling surrounded her. She lowered her head and didn't say anything. She had nothing to add. She looked at him and said, "I'm going to the bathroom." "Okay." Shin Luo took a sip of tea. "I'll take you to see our son after dinner." Shin Manting's posture stiffened slightly, and she quickly left. When she walked to the bathroom, she realized that he wasn't afraid that she would run away. Was he? So when she stood up, she deliberately mentioned their son. She had to admit that this was a very effective method. Not to mention that Shin Manting didn't have any intention of running away. Even if she did, she might give up her original plan because of his words. Shin Luo knew her too well. She went to the bathroom and washed her hands carefully before returning to the dining table. Shin Luo was on the phone. He looked calm and emotionless. "Got it. I'm eating. We'll talk when we get back," Shin Luo said lightly. Then, as if he had thought of something, he said, "By the way, Manting will go back with us later. You should get ready." Shin Manting was shocked and looked at him. On the other end of the phone, Shin Luoan said incredulously, "What? She's going to see the baby, and then she'll leave." As he spoke, Shin Luoan looked at her as if asking, "Right?" Shin Manting smiled awkwardly and nodded before sitting down. The dishes were quickly served, and Shin Luoan hung up the phone. No one spoke first. They ate quietly from the beginning to the end. Shin Manting, on the other hand, felt at ease. She didn't stand on ceremony and ate a lot. Shin Luoan paid the bill and quickly led her home. Looking at the familiar villa, Shin Manting found it difficult to move forward. Although this was not the place where she grew up, she had lived here for several years. In those years there were laughter and pain. Except for Shin Luo, and the people inside were all very nice to her. Shin Manting always felt that she owed him. Now that he had set foot on this piece of land again, he felt very complicated. Shin Luo and had already pressed the doorbell. He looked back at Shin Manting, who was a few meters away, and said coldly, "Why aren't you coming over? You want me to invite you?" Shin Manting moved her lips as if she wanted to say something, but no words came out. She could only give up. He walked forward, and soon the door opened. When he saw Shin Luo and she said, "You're finally back, baby." But before he could finish his sentence, he caught a glimpse of another figure behind Shin Luoan. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.